Most recently, new technology has raised the possibility of reduced reliance on centralized intermediaries like banks and credit card companies. In 2008, a person or group of people using the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto proposed a decentralized peer-to-peer system for making and processing payments. A key challenge in digital payments is to prevent the same assets from being spent twice. The Bitcoin white paper proposed a novel method for validating transactions using cryptography that addressed the so-called double spend problem.
Happy Bitcoin Tuesday, freaks. It's your boy Odell here for Citadel Dispatch 62. Citadel Dispatch is an interactive live show about Bitcoin, privacy, freedom, and open source software. We're joined here by repeat guest Wiz. I will get to him in a moment. We are both in person. This is going to be a fun in-person rip. As always, I want to thank all of freaks out there for supporting Citadel Dispatch. Citadel Dispatch is 100% audience funded without ads or sponsors. Without you, the show would not be possible. There are multiple ways you can support Dispatch. You can stream sats to the show using a Podcasting 2.0 app. My two favorites are Fountain Podcasts and Breeze Wallet. They work like regular podcast apps. Load them up with sats. Choose how many sats per minute you think Dispatch is worth. And then as you listen, it will stream sats directly to my node. You can also contribute via BTC Pay server located at citadeldispatch.com. Lightning and on-chain is accepted. Or you can pay via my BIP47 payment code, which is located at citadeldispatch.com/contribute. If you are tight on sats and you still want to support the show, you can also support us by sharing the show with your friends and family, clicking the subscribe button in whatever podcasting app you like to use. It's available on every single podcasting app, including Apple Podcasts, if you so desire, and leaving a review. Reviews do actually help a lot in terms of getting the show, better algorithm placement or whatever the fuck they're doing over there. Anyway, with all that said, our great intro to this show was Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen explaining Bitcoin. Or at least her speechwriter explaining Bitcoin and her reading the words out loud, which was kind of unreal to see. I mean, when a lot of myself included, on Twitter, we thought it might be a deep fake, but it turns out to be real. So momentous occasion, I guess. Let's get to our guest. How's it going, Wiz?
Hey, Matt, it's great to be here.
So, Wiz, you've been on the show
A few times now.
is this the fourth time?
I think once with Simon, once with Adam back, and now it's just you and me.
Let's fucking rip Adam back. It was a fantastic conversation. Did you meet him in Miami?
Yeah, I met him a few times. Once was at this Liquid meetup we had, and of course he was at the conference venue as well. But yeah, Miami was great, huh?
Yeah, Miami was fantastic. I guess let's start there. Wiz was heavily involved with me on the open source stage, which if you haven't listened to is available on YouTube. Shortly should be available on bitcointv.com.
All 3 days of content are now live on Bitcoin.
Awesome. And it's in this podcast feed. I don't know, to the ride or die freaks out there, you might have noticed that I just started posting a lot of content on the podcast feed for you guys to get through. Hopefully you appreciate it. I also posted not just open source stage content from Bitcoin 2022, but also my mining panel I did with Econo Alchemist, Diverter, Coin Heated, and John, the man behind FutureBit. And I posted 2 of my Bitcoin takeover talks, which happened at Bitcoin Commons in Austin, one with Maulers and one with legendary Andrew Polstra, which is probably the best interview I've ever done. So if you haven't checked that out, consider going back and listening to it after the fact. And I have a spicy lightning conversation that I will be posting shortly that was with Lisa Rockstar and Miles Suter. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, all the panels on the open source stage were just pure fire.
What was your favorite?
Well, of course, my favorite was
Besides the one you were on.
no, my favorite was definitely the mempools panel, which I moderated. I can't deny that. I mean, it was just so fun to be on stage with Merch and Gloria and Sergey from BitRefill talking about the mempool.
All-star lineup right there.
Well, the best panels are just like right now. We're just friends hanging out, having a good conversation, and everyone else on the internet is listening. And that's when it's really great discussion.
Yeah, I mean, the open source stage was just, I mean, it was like 8 months of work. Huge thank you to everyone who helped to make that possible with me. There was just a massive team involved. I mean, so many different moving pieces. And of course, huge thanks to all the speakers who joined us. Like we had, I mean, it wouldn't have been the great content that it was if it wasn't for all the individuals who came out and actually participated. So
yeah, the open source stage was the real conference. That was like the real Bitcoin conference inside the Bitcoin conference.
Well, I mean, I think, part of the balancing act of these large events is trying to make it approachable to a lot of different groups of people. I mean, there's a lot of subsets of Bitcoiners, and I obviously don't agree with all of them. But if we had to like or agree with all Bitcoiners, then Bitcoin's already failed, right? The beauty of Bitcoin is that it's for enemies. There is definitely, I mean, look, I mean, we see this with Dispatch, right? So, I mean, open source stage, if you listen to Citadel Dispatch, was probably pretty familiar to you. It was basically 3 days of Citadel Dispatch. But you always see that, like, the flashier stuff, the number go up, price stuff, absolving you of personal responsibility, that always gets way more engagement, right? No matter what, across the board, whether that's an in-person conference or
Well, you had the main stage, which was full of like announcements by big names, and you had the humble open source stage, which was just the open source devs. Like Evan was killing it up on stage, moderating his own panels and everything. And I just felt like that was the real Bitcoin energy. I mean, even a few years ago, the entire Bitcoin conference was like the size of just that room.
right. It was like the size of the open source stage was like the size of Bitcoin 2019.
How many people?
The whole thing.
How many people would you say fit in that room? Like 1,000 or maybe 2,000 max?
Fire code is 2,000.
Right. So an entire Bitcoin conference being 2,000 people just a few years ago,
Right.
kind of
Pretty crazy.
pretty crazy to imagine. Now we have just the open source stage with that much. So that was really cool. And the main stage, geez, what was that, like 10,000 people in there?
I think it was 15,000 person
That's
capacity.
insane. That's insane.
Yeah. But anyway, one thing that unfortunately got cut because of budget cuts was the live stream of the open source stage, and you sought out to fix that. You want to go into that a little bit?
Right. I think we all got there on the first industry day and realized right away that, oh no, there's no live stream at the open source stage. And you tweeted out something like, yeah, sorry guys, there wasn't budget for this or something. And even Jack replied, he's like,
I was like, I know everyone's disappointed, like myself included. Like there's no
and I was like, well, I can fix this, you know? So we got some guys together, some mempool guys, and one guy ordered the wired internet connection at the convention center. One guy ran to Best Buy to buy like a camera. Somebody else at the Apple store to grab like a Mac Mini, and I think we rented an 82-inch TV. And yeah, I mean, we had like our own pirate live stream going for a while. And
to bitcointv.com,
of course, where else?
which is what we work on together.
Yeah, right now we're in the world headquarter Bitcoin TV studio, also known as Rod's Garage. Oh no. Okay, I guess I'm kind of doxing it right now. All right, everyone, Rod has a garage.
You've officially told the world that he has a garage.
But yeah, that was a cool project, and Bitcoin TV was in a really cool position because YouTube deleted the Bitcoin Magazine channel, like right in the middle of the conference.
Yeah, and there's theories about why that happened, but no one really knows for sure. But it got restored pretty quickly.
Why do you think it was?
Ricardo Salinas. So I mean, my focus was open source stage. Obviously, was my baby. So I spent 95% of my time there. I didn't really get to see any of the main stage talks or any of the other stages at all. I mean, there was 5 stages in total. And I need to go back and watch them. But supposedly Ricardo Salinas, who is, I believe, the second richest man in Mexico, had a talk where he had what's the Bank of International Settlements guy? Augustin Carstens, Christian Lagarde,
The big guy?
Christine Lagarde. Yeah, the big guy, Christine Lagarde, and someone else. And he had like demonic, like demon horns coming out. And as soon as that went up, the account got nuked. So there's
No warnings.
there's a theory. Yeah, there was no warnings.
Wow.
But it got restored relatively quickly. But that just goes to show, like, you don't want to have, Bitcoin Magazine was heavily reliant on YouTube as a streaming platform. And they also had Rumble and Twitch. But you don't want these central points of failure. And at the very least, just to be able to diversify, right? So like all the content will be available on bitcointv.com. We're working with them directly.
I think a lot of the videos are already up there, on either on the Bitcoin Magazine channel or on the Bitcoin TV channel. Just kind of.
But anyway, I just thought it was pretty cool to highlight that, like, Wiz literally like went to the Wiz and a couple of guys like went to the store. They like bought a DSLR, like an expensive Canon. They used my podcast mic, my travel podcast mic, Mac Mini, and an internet connection, and they were able to do the live stream, which was really fucking cool. But as I said, all that content is still available to be watched. And a huge shout out to the video team. I mean, I worked with them directly to make sure that they got the open source videos were on priority because it wasn't live stream. So they did get up really quickly. Okay, so I mean, I work with you on Bitcoin TV, but you're also heavily involved in a lot of other Bitcoin projects, including mempool, bisq, and liquid, all open source projects. So which one should we start discussing first? What do you want to talk about first? You want to talk about mempool first?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk
'Cause
about.
no one gives a shit about liquid. So we'll start with mempool, and then we'll move to bisq.
Yeah, mempool space has been getting really popular lately. We just launched the new mining dashboard at Meetup
At Nash Bitcoiners.
at Nash Bitcoiners. Yeah, that was a really cool event. We had about 100, 200 people there.
Usually we get 200 every month. I like to think it's the largest meetup not run by Parker Lewis. But that specific meetup, we had a tornado watch. So we had like 100, 110 people there.
Yeah, it was storming pretty.
Only the ride or dies came out. And really only the extra ride or dies stayed for a drink afterwards. Like a lot of people bolted as soon as the meetup ended.
Yeah, it was storming so hard that night. I remember stepping out of like an Uber and just put my foot into like a foot deep of rainwater.
Yeah, I mean, when I went home, just walking to the car was like it was like a 2-minute walk to the car, and I was just completely soaked. It was like I took a bath.
But that was great.
But yeah, so you launched the new mining dashboard, which as the freaks know, we always have mempool space, which is Wiz's mempool, up in the background. But now they have this mining dashboard. I think I can switch to it. Boom, switch to it.
Nice.
If you're watching the video, whether it's the recordings on bitcointv.com after the fact, or you're watching us live on Twitch or Twitter, twitch.tv/Citadel Dispatch is the best place to watch live. You can also watch on Bitcoin TV live, but you won't get notifications or anything.
Oh, yeah.
So let's talk about the mining dashboard real quick here.
Yeah, so it started last Miami conference. Actually, we had the bisq and mempool booth. I guess the organizers of the conference just gave us this amazing booth location, and we went all out. We made a bunch of T-shirts and everything, but we probably met maybe 2,000 people at this booth. Like, they just had huge lines of people, coming to get T-shirts and make donations to the project and talk to us. And one of the groups of people that stopped by was Foundry, the what's now the largest mining pool in Bitcoin, but at the time was basically zero hash power. And they said, we want to give you guys a grant, support the project. And I think we flew out to New York to meet them there. And they essentially asked us, said, we'll give you a grant, but we want to ask you to make like more mining related features. So we researched all of the best mining dashboards that were out there. And most mining pools have their own, but they're not open source. Like Slushpool has a really nice one, or Luxor has a very nice one. BTC.com also had a bunch of charts and stuff. And so I guess we just researched all the best ideas and remixed it with our usual mempool space, passionate arguments between the guys. And over the course of a few months, our new developer, Kappa and Soft Simon, everyone, I basically locked them in an office for a few weeks and chained them to the desk and whipped them until the mining dashboard came out. And it was great. Now you can see all the historical blockchain data all the way back to the genesis of Bitcoin, how mining pools evolved over time, how the difficulty evolved over time, all the typical features you would want if you're interested in mining. So we still have that first mempool dashboard on the homepage, but if you click the hammer icon, you get the mining dashboard, which is optimized for not creating transactions, but mining transactions. So
I think one thing that's really cool is like if you click the individual pool, you can see the pool's history. So like I just clicked Foundry, you can actually see their hash rate climb over time, how quick it climbed.
yeah, it's
It's a
insane.
really clean way of doing it. I also like if you go into the graphs, you can see all the pools DOMs lined up. Foundry on the bottom. I guess it's listed in order of current hash rate, right? From bottom to top.
So
So you can see like
if you change it to like a 2-year time frame, it's just insane how
quick Foundry just blew
I know
up.
they just came out of nowhere, right? Like a year and a half ago, they were literally zero.
December 27th, like January 1st, 2021, they were basically zero. They were at 0.36%. And now they're at
20%.
19%. Anyway,
Also,
so one of the cool things about mempool, so mempool is an open source project, but then mempool.space, which is this hosted version of the mempool open source project that obviously uses your node, but you can run the mempool open source project using your own node. I know it's incorporated in pretty much all the major node projects at this point.
that's correct. Yeah, we have integrations for one-click installation on Umbrel, Raspberry Blitz, MyNode, Ronin Dojo, Citadel, NixOS, and now
Start9 you just
Start9
added, right?
just shipped it a few days ago. Yeah, so pretty much any full node distribution that you're using, you should be able to very easily install your own instance of the mempool open source project and monitor your mempool.
And then you can use your own node with your own mempool. You don't have to trust Wiz and Co.
Exactly.
And you get the privacy benefits of not hitting your servers.
Right. You get the security benefits. You don't have to trust what our servers say the Bitcoin blockchain is. You can verify on your own node. Privacy benefits because any TXIDs or addresses that you look up will only go to your node. And you also get the censorship resistance in case mempool space is attacked or censored off the internet somehow. You don't need to rely on our infrastructure. But of course, if you do want to use mempool space, just to quickly check something, or maybe you don't have your own Raspberry Pi full node, we don't do any like long-term logging of user data. We don't share any data with third parties, and it's completely self-hosted. So we don't use any hosting companies. Whereas I think Blockstream.info is hosted on Google Cloud, and Blockchain.info is hosted behind Cloudflare or something.
So their trusted third party has a trusted third party
Yes,
as well.
it's literally man in the middle as a service, right?
Yeah, well,
they have all the
Cloudflare is.
Yeah, I mean, they have all the SSL private keys. They're
Right.
logging all of your IP addresses with the
It's literally their service to do that.
Yes. And I see why they use it, because it's very easy to protect yourself against denial of service attacks if you put yourself behind a trusted third party, but you should not trust third parties. I mean, trusted third parties are security holes. This
Right.
is just basic.
Or at least minimize your trust as much as possible. So, I mean, so you said specifically that you guys don't keep logs, which is obviously great. You want to hear that from your companies, but it's important for the freaks to realize that there's no way for anyone to independently verify the non-existence of logs. You can't prove that they're deleted or they don't exist. So whenever someone says they're not logging, just always take it with a grain of salt because a lot of times they are still logging.
Yeah, I mean,
Not to accuse you of anything.
No, we delete logs after 10 days, which is
Right,
just
but that's a trust. That's a trust
yeah,
model.
of course. But you should not trust me or anyone.
Right, and you don't have to. You can just run the
Yeah.
the open source code yourself with your own node.
Even with one-click installation, even Boomer Uncle Marty can do it on his Raspberry Pi, right? Just one click and you have your own
Exactly.
and it's
It's pretty cool how far we've come on that, you know.
yeah, that was the original goal of the project, was to make a self-hosted Explorer, because there was no really good like one-click installation Explorer on a Raspberry Pi at that time. And so when we started the mempool project, just about 3 years ago, maybe longer now, it was just the mempool visualizer, the mempool V1, and that was very easy to get up and running. But mempool V2 with the full block explorer functionality took several months of hard work to get that working. We had to make an interface between different backends on the Raspberry Pi, so it doesn't only use Bitcoin D, it also uses the Electris backend, Roman Z Electris backend.
Right, Electrum Rust server.
Right, which is the typical lightweight one that runs on Raspberry Pis very easily. And then for a production server like mempool.space, we use Blockstream's fork of that. Blockstream Electris has its own REST API. And so we had to kind of go back to the Roman Z Electris and in our own wrapper around that, re-implement the Blockstream REST API so that you could use it on Raspberry Pi as well. And that's when...
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so we had a bunch of really cool ideas how to make that work on Raspberry Pi. And once it, became one-click installation on Raspberry, you get the full API. So if you go to mempool space and you click on the, I think it's like the documentation, the book icon, all of those APIs, of course, work on the mempool space site. But if you have your own Raspberry Pi and you do one-click installation on mempool, all those APIs will work exactly the same on your own self-hosted mempool instance as well. So you can do address lookups or transaction lookups using your own node very, very easily.
I mean, what are the trade-offs if you're using it with your own node? It's less performant than if we are hitting yours professional server or whatever.
It's fine for most home users. So the only real limitation is that the Roman Z Electris backend will only support lookups on Bitcoin addresses with fewer than 100 transactions. So if you're trying to look up a very, very popular Bitcoin address, that lookup will just fail on your Raspberry Pi. And that's not a big deal for most people looking up their own transactions, because most people don't reuse addresses. Most wallets
shouldn't. Yeah.
Right. You should never use reuse addresses. And most wallets these days are very good about that. I mean, HD wallets have been around for a long time now.
Those are the wallets that automatically give you a new address every time you click receive.
Right. Every time you click the receive button, your wallet will generate a new address, and you typically only have 2 or 3 transactions per address. So you would not hit that Roman Z Electris limit.
And then what about so the whole mining dashboard is also built into it isn't?
Well, we haven't shipped that for Raspberry Pi.
But it will be?
It will be, yeah. So right now, the latest version on Raspberry Pi is 2.3, which we were running on the site until about, 2 weeks ago. And now that Miami is over, we can go back to shipping, working on shipping the 2.4 with the mining dashboard for everyone to Raspberry Pi. So it's a pretty big project nowadays. I mean, we have a total of 8 people working on mempool, and we're funded directly by the community. We just we got all the grants from all the best Bitcoin companies in the space. Like, huge thanks to Spiral and Gemini and Foundry and Exodus and Unchained and Blockstream, have all been very, very gracious, and especially Jack personally, also very generous donations to the project. And
he donated personally and his company donated.
Yeah, he's probably our biggest supporter, both in terms.
Not the first supporter though.
Oh yes, I can't.
Who was the first supporter of the mempool open source project?
That would be the man right across from me, Mr. Matt Odell. First, and Jameson Lopp actually sent his donation transaction first, but because Matt had a higher fee, it was confirmed one block before
priorities.
Lopp's transaction. Yeah, I used a high fee rate on that. So once the blockchain will show that you were the first.
The
donation.
blockchain does not lie. So I want to talk about that a little bit, but before I do, I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show, as always, if you want to join our live audience chat, which makes the show special, we have a fantastic matrix room, which is a distributed messaging protocol that you're able to self-host. And you can get to that through going to citadeldispatch.com and clicking that Citadel chat link. It'll take you there, and just you follow the steps. It's easier to install and run it than you might think. And we have a great group of Bitcoiners in there. We have almost 1,100 Bitcoiners in there, and we're talking Bitcoin, distributed systems, privacy, open source software, all sorts of freedom tech every day of the week, not just when the show's on. But when the show's on, it becomes our live audience chat. So definitely come join us there. So Wiz, we were talking about, mempool is an open source project. Funding, how you deal with funding is mostly grant based and individual contributor based. How do you look at that? Is that a sustainable method? Is that?
I think in the early days of the project, when it was just me and Simon, if we only have a couple guys taking salary from the funds of the project, it's fine. But as the project has grown, I mean, now we have very large apps like Cash App sending us all of their users, and we have servers in multiple continents. And
when you say Cash App sending users, is because mempool.space is their block explorer. So when you click in details for an address, it opens up mempool.space, right?
Yeah, it's so cool to see someone use Cash App in the United States and click on that block explorer button and see it open up in mempool space. I mean, like I said, Square and Spiral and Block, they're just our huge supporter, but it's also the open source project. I mean, they just support open source in general.
Right.
And when you talk about funding, yeah, they've also been our biggest funding backer. But I think going back to your question, now that we have 8 people in the project and we're self-hosting our own servers and network infrastructure. I mean, mempool space is its own ISP. We own our own IP blocks, and we have trans peerings with all these tier 1 providers all over the world now, just to mitigate the risk of third-party surveillance and censorship on our website. It's become a huge responsibility for the community to operate this site. I'm actually about, right after this podcast is done, about to get on the plane and fly to another data center and work on some more servers just to improve mempool space. So as the expenses of the project grow up, yeah, we really need to think about how to keep it going long term. Now that we've gotten so many donations from the community and so many grants from all the enterprise sponsors, how do we ethically monetize the site without ruining it so that we can fund the development of the open source project? And I think a lot of projects in the space have the same kind of dilemma, right? For example, Evan with Zeus Wallet or
right.
any great open source projects in the space, they're all thinking the same thing. You could just put ads on the site and ruin it, right? And that's what
right. Fuck ads.
Right, exactly. All the developers.
Why I started Dispatch.
So yeah, I think one business model which might be a good fit for mempool space someday would be to build a layer 2, I guess, mempool market, or maybe more accurately, a market for space in the Bitcoin blockchain. I mean, right now the mempool is totally empty, and you can use 1 sat per byte and
it confirms 2 blocks or something
immediately, right? But as we saw last year, when the mempool gets full, all of a sudden we have 9,000 messages every day from lost newbies. Help me, my transaction is stuck in a mempool. Can you please confirm it? And I think it would be really cool if we had a button on the website when you're tracking your transaction where you could just pay some sats over Lightning, and we could have one of our friends at a mining pool manually prioritize your transaction and provide a useful service to the community to help.
Right, so out of band fee payments,
Right. I think that's
as opposed to, so in band is like when you construct a Bitcoin transaction, maybe you go to mempool.space to see, or your own mempool instance, or in the wallet that shows you like what different fee rates you can pay to get into a block. But it's not exactly a perfect measurement. So then after you send it, if you want to bump that fee, if you want to increase that fee, then you can maybe go to mempool.space and pay an additional fee that goes to a miner to get it into a block, right?
Yeah, and I think the usual response when I bounce the idea off people is like, well, why wouldn't I just use RBF or
Right.
CPFP even? And yeah, you should absolutely use RBF or CPFP if you have to. And usually, most wallets these days are very good about supporting RBF.
Right. So RBF is replaced by fee.
Right. So if you made a transaction with 10 sats and the mempool spikes up suddenly and now it's buried, you can replace that transaction by increasing the fee of the transaction,
Right.
20 sats or 30 sats.
And then the major trade-off there is when you actually send the first transaction, you have to have RBF enabled to begin with.
Right. Or your wallet has to support it.
Right. Your wallet has to basically have it enabled.
Or you have to have enough extra sats in the wallet to be able to increase the fee. Like if you were just sweeping all the funds from an address.
And then you have nothing to add.
Exactly. So there are some times when you can't use RBF for various reasons. And CPFP, child pays for parent, is another good way to increase the effective rate of a transaction. So this is actually one feature that mempool space has that no other block explorer has, is the ability to see the effective fee rate of a transaction.
Right. If you use child pay for parent. So child pay for parent is like if I send a Bitcoin transaction and it has change, the change goes back to me. If I then spend that change with a higher fee, then a miner is incentivized to mine both transactions at the same time. So that effective fee rate of the first transaction needs to include that child transaction, right? In terms of, that's what the effective fee shows on the website, right?
Exactly. And so if you have two transactions that are the same number of bytes, same size, then the effective fee rate would be the average of those two transactions. So
Right.
if you made one with 10 sats, but now you need to pay 50 sats to get into the next block, and you really want it to be confirmed, you could spend the change somewhere else with a very, very high fee rate, like 200 sats, and then the average would be closer to 100.
Right. And specifically with child pays for parent, which by the way, I just think is such a funny Bitcoin term, but because parents pay for their children, but if you're sending to yourself, you can always do child pays for parent, because you can take whatever that output of that transaction is, and then you can then send it again.
Well, it gets complicated, right?
Right.
Because if you swept all the funds from an address and you don't have any funds left to
But you send it to a new address that you control, and then you just send that transaction again, and child pays for parent. Boom.
But the problem is that if your first transaction gets purged out of the mempool,
Right. If you're in a sustained high.
so if say you make a mistake and you used 1 sat per byte on your trend, and the mempool surges up, and that gets purged and deleted and rejected.
Right. What's the default mempool size? 300 megs? Is that it?
Right, 300 megabytes. And
So everyone by default, their Bitcoin node is holding. The way I like to think about the mempool is like it's a big waiting line. Like you're trying to get into a restaurant or something, and it's this big line. In the Bitcoin defaults, that line can be 300 megabytes big, and then if someone's paying and then the lowest fee transactions start getting dropped out of that line because they're not paying enough, right?
Right. So if you get outbid so badly that you get bumped out of the line, your transaction will just be not even in the mempool. It'll just be stuck in your local node's mempool, and your local node or wallet will try to rebroadcast it to the network, but you have no way of CPFPing that transaction
because the miners don't see the parent.
Correct. And that is a huge problem, which Gloria Zhao has been working very hard to fix in Bitcoin Core. She's working on this feature called Package Relay Accept, which would allow you to broadcast two transactions together in a package where
Their
one,
effective fee rate is above whatever that limit is.
right. This is a big problem for layer 2, like Lightning, for example.
Like the trust model, right? Where you need to be able to.
And you should watch the mempool panel video on Bitcoin TV where Gloria explains this much better than I can. But she is working very hard to solve this problem, which is essentially a security hole in Lightning, right? Where Lightning makes lots of assumptions about the mempool that you're always going to be able to settle a transaction within a certain time frame, which is just not true. And
Well, if we're in a system,
right, there's no guarantee that your transaction will be confirmed. And so CPFP is one way to increase the effective fee rate, unless if the first transaction has such a low fee rate that it is completely rejected and purged. So she's working very hard to fix that, and hopefully that'll. But this kind of leads us to the third way to bump a fee transaction, which would be the out of band method. And a few mining pools have done this in the past, where you could pay them, or essentially bribe them with a very, very high overpriced payment.
Usually via credit cards, or sometimes through shitcoins.
It has not been implemented well.
And it was also like, I mean, I remember it in like the 2017, during the 2017 fork wars, when fees got really high. I mean, it seems pretty obvious after the fact that that was part of a Bcash attack to try and inflate fees. But that was pre-Lightning, right? So you didn't even have Lightning to be able to accept a native Bitcoin out of band payment. So it was either credit cards or shitcoins.
Right. And now there's a number of layer 2 networks we could use, like Lightning or Liquid, and a whole number of ways which you could do an out of band payment to, get your layer 1 transaction unstuck from the mempool and confirmed into a block quickly. And so I think that's what the long-term goal of the project will be, is to help the community get their transactions confirmed. And this is something that should be fixed by Bitcoin Core in the long run, through the efforts of Gloria and other very, very smart people working to make a fair market for everyone, where you shouldn't need this service. But in the meantime, I guess this is where mempool space can come in and kind of help, just with our friends at different mining pools and our developer resources to try and, help the community provide a useful service and charge a fair price for it. And
it's definitely more useful if it's definitely more useful of a service, I imagine, if it's multiple mining pools instead of just a single mining pool offering it, right?
Right. And it's very complicated to do this because it presents a number of, or maybe it kind of highlights a number of problems that already currently exist. For example, I remember a few months back, the owner of what was it, the fish mining pool, F2 pool?
F2 pool, yeah. It used to be discus fish.
Right. They still use the fish emoji in the Coinbase text.
Wang Chung
sent a 1 Bitcoin payment to, I think it was Luke Dash Jr.
Yeah.
But he just deflected.
And it had like 9,000 Bitcoin change too on it or something like
exactly.
that.
He spent a 9,000 Bitcoin UTXO and
to send 1 Bitcoin,
which is already a massive flex. But just to be like over the top, he also paid 0 fee.
And then mined it with his own pool.
And it
flex.
Right, what a flex. But if empty and the blocks are not full, then that's okay. But the minute mempool is congested, he would have essentially been basically, by not paying a fee to his own pool, he's essentially, I don't want to use the word stealing revenue, but he should have paid sats to the pool to have that transaction.
There's an opportunity cost, because if mempools are full, he could have mined a different transaction where they would have got paid a fee. Instead, he mined a 0 fee.
Right. And this is just one example, and it's not an issue if the mempool is empty. But when the mempool is full and people want to get their transactions manually prioritized to get confirmed and mined into a block, then mining pools would now have this problem where, okay, I prioritized this guy's transaction and we took some money for it. They have to pass that revenue on to the pool, onto the actual miners. and they have to do this in an auditable and transparent way. And mempool fixes this because mempool, it's not exposed on the website yet, but mempool will have the ability to show a projected mempool block and compare that against the actual mined block in the blockchain and say what transactions should have been in there or shouldn't have been in there and what the difference in fees actually was. And so, for example, in that case of that 9,000 Bitcoin UTXO transaction, mempool space would say, oh yeah, he should have paid 500 sats fee for that. It can, make this visible on the website, and then the mining pool or however we end up doing it would have to, debit this guy's account 500 sats and credit the account of the pool 500 sats. And that would make it a more fair system. And it's actually a bigger problem with Stratum v2, which I'm sure Matt can explain this better than I can. But Stratum v2 allows for all home miners,
or at least one component of it, one aspect of Stratum v2. And so right now, as it stands, I think that's where you're going with it. Right now, as it stands, the mining pool operator is constructing the blocks. They're deciding which transactions are in each block. Even though there's miners located around the world that are maybe using this pool and contributing work to a pool, they don't choose which transactions are in the block. The mining pool operator chooses it. In Stratum v2, part of their proposal is that the miners themselves, all the individual miners themselves, can construct the block.
Exactly. And so this doesn't solve the issue of people prioritizing transactions out of band and pocketing the revenue for it. It just transfers the problem to every home miner can now do this.
Right.
So if Matt has a few miners in his garage and he chooses to prioritize my zero fee transaction,
Because you're paying me separately.
Right, cash under the table or however we do it,
Sats under the table.
then the pool misses out on that revenue. And you could say that Matt,
and that's an unsolved problem. I mean, that's part of the reason why that aspect of Stratum v2 hasn't rolled out yet.
Right,
like
but
they've rolled out the other aspects of Stratum v2, which gives you better performance, more secure connection.
Right, and because the mempool's been empty, this wasn't a huge concern. But the minute the mempool gets full and out of band transaction prioritization becomes a very lucrative thing to do, this would be a huge problem with Stratum v2. And so
and also there's some, I believe there's some, at least in my head, there seems like there could be some, like there's just attack vectors there of maybe miners going into other pools and trying to basically
it's like a
denial of service them. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
By just not including any transact. Like the extreme is mine empty blocks, right, where you don't add any transactions to the block.
Yeah, the game theory is quite complex, but I'm very excited to try and help solve this problem with the mempool open source project. If we can, using our dashboard and our projected mempool blocks, to calculate what a miner should have included in their block and identify rogue transactions that got prioritized, then the mining pool operator, who's essentially a coordinator for the accounting at this point, could say, Matt prioritized Wiz transaction, so we're going to debit his account by so many sats because we can see that and in a verifiable
You can
way.
verify it. Yeah.
Exactly. And everyone running their own Raspberry Pi at home would also see the same thing on their own self-hosted mempool. So,
oh, that's interesting.
Right. This is kind of going to be like our attempt to contribute to Stratum v2 and help fix this accounting issue. And so if a mining pool operator has this implemented, then they would be able to roll out Stratum v2 and let home users pick their own transactions.
And if they do it in a non-profitable, maximizing way, they can penalize them financially.
Exactly. And likewise, they do prioritize transactions in the honest way and pass that revenue onto the pool somehow, however we end up figuring out how to do this, then it would create a new revenue stream for the entire pool. And so it would incentivize pools to, fix this problem and implement transaction acceleration out of band and just open up the free market a little bit more for these stuck transactions.
So, I mean, one of the cool aspects to me of the Bitcoin free market is that it's this truly free market where people are basically bidding on this scarce resource, which is block space, to get included in the transactions. And as demand goes up, at any given time, the fee rates that you need go up. And if you're willing to wait, you can pay a lower fee rate. It's this really beautiful free market that's available to all and free, like easily to view and verify and whatnot. Are there's this idea of out of band payments has come up a lot in the past. It's not a new concept. But now all of a sudden you're adding another more opaque variable to that free market. I respect that. It seems like your plan for mempools out of band payments is to try and make it more open. But I'm just curious from like a Bitcoiner's perspective, should we be concerned about out of band payments in general, fucking with maybe incentives or fucking with the free market, right? Like, is there a...
Well, I think the important thing to remember is that you can already do out-of-band payments now,
right?
by bribing a miner to mine whatever you want. And we do see this.
Or if you're weighing on, you just call up the engineer and tell them to include the transaction.
Exactly, right. I mean, people already do shenanigans all the time with mining and include random transactions, non-standard transactions, extremely large transactions. I mean, I think there's been some blocks where like an entire 1 megabyte transaction was the only transaction in the block,
Right.
or something like this.
And it's more than just out of band payments, right? There could be like basically out of band partnerships or something where like let's imagine like a Cash App becomes one of the major transactors on the network, and they just have a relationship with a single mining pool that just every time they broadcast a transaction just shows no fee, and they have like a subscription or something, right?
Yeah, I think the market for mining will develop, has a lot of room to evolve and develop over time. And it's simply because the mempool's been empty for most of Bitcoin history. But once the fee market or blockchain space market, someone wants...
Me and Wiz got a lot of flack and pie in our face because we got fee FOMO last year.
Well, I wasn't the one who said Bitcoin fees are designed to pump forever.
I don't know who said that, but someone's got to go check the tapes if they want to know.
But I mean, it's kind of true if you figure that Satoshi intended the block subsidy reward to trend and have down to zero over the next 100 or so years. Obviously, we need this fee market or space market to develop. And the way it develops is yet to be seen, right? I mean, we'll all be dead by the time by the subsidy gets to
But
zero.
there is an argument that like as Bitcoin increases in purchasing power, so does the purchasing power of that base fee, which is like you can't pay a transaction that's lower than 1 sat per byte.
Well, there's been discussion.
The purchasing power of that 1 sat per byte fee is gone up as Bitcoin price goes up, right?
There's been discussions to reduce the min relay fee and min fee rate below 1 sat per vbyte. Whether that gets adopted or not, I don't know. And that's another thing that could be done out of band, right? Because it's only the policy of the peer-to-peer network,
right,
that restricts such a low fee transaction from being propagated. You could just, like Wang Chun did,
or even with this mempool space
exactly.
idea, you can do a 0 fee transaction, broadcast it to mempool.space, and include an out of band payment with it. That's less than 1 sat per byte, presumably.
Exactly. So I think this could be a really interesting feature of the site to work on, and a service for the community if they wish to use it. Of course, you should always use RBF or CPFP when you can. You should always use a accurate fee estimate.
And I feel like there's another point here that should be clear. So with Bitcoin on chain fees, it's not how much you're sending that dictates the fee. It's how much data is the size of the transaction. So, and the biggest contributor to the data size is how many UTXOs on that input side when you're creating the transaction, how many UTXOs you're using to create it. But there's situations where, for instance, a 10 Bitcoin transaction could be paying a less fee than a 1 Bitcoin transaction because the 1 Bitcoin transaction is larger in size. So it's not data size. So it's not how much you're sending. Now with Lightning, it's a completely different fee method, which is a percentage-based fee, which people are probably more used to in the fiat world, which is this idea that you're paying a percentage on the amount you send. So this is a key difference in the two fee markets, of the Lightning fee market and the on-chain fee market. I think it should be interesting to see how they complement each other and play off of each other as the networks develop. One thing I definitely want to touch on here is you keep saying the mempool. The mempool doesn't exist. There's no the mempool. There's a lot of mempools throughout the world that are hosted by different individuals, right?
It's kind of funny, but one takeaway I had from Miami is that when a lot of Bitcoiners say the mempool, they mean my mempool. And I don't mean that in like an arrogant way. It's just mempool.
Stay humble, Wiz.
I mean, mempool space is becoming, I guess, really popular, and all the best wallets and exchanges use it. And so when they say their transaction is stuck in the mempool, they're usually looking on mempool space to indicate that. But yeah, every node has their own mempool, and you should not trust my mempool or our mempool. You should verify in your own.
And it's still, I mean, even if you're using your own mempool, it's still, but I mean, when we're talking about mempools, we should really be saying mempools, not mempool, and we should say a mempool, not the mempool, even though it sounds weird. But even if you're using your own mempool and your own node, there's still a lot of value to have a basically trusted third-party mempool that you can confirm off of and double check what your node is showing and see if there's any bullshit happening, right? And ideally a couple, right? I mean, I know the Knicks guys also run their own mempool instance, right?
Right. And one of our contributors, MC, also runs his own mempool instance, like mempool.mc.de.
So you can theoretically use your own mempool and then confirm against 3 others or something.
Yeah, that's an excellent way. And we've thought about making some kind of federated model for this. But I think in practice, most people just want like a single oracle to quickly check something. And it's actually a very common request from exchanges. For example, in Exodus Wallet, when they sell someone some Bitcoin.
Closed source wallet, don't use it. Continue.
Well, say, for example, you're connecting your Trezor to your Exodus wallet. So you're verifying with your own hardware wallet that the funds were received. They actually link to mempool space for that. And the reason they don't want to run their own mempool instance and do want to link for us is because they are the counterparty to the transaction.
Right.
So mempool space acts as like a neutral third party to,
it's like it's an arbitration kind of, or an arbitrator, right? You're like a...
Well, that's something that bisq has. Mempool is more of an oracle, maybe.
Right.
So, but it doesn't have to be if you run your own.
Cool. So I mean, I look forward to seeing what you guys have in store in terms of creating a more sustainable open source project. I think obviously that's a major topic of discussion on Dispatch. I because open source software is the future we want to see, is a world built on top of open source software and proliferation of open source software, because this code is not controlled by a single company or an individual. It will outlive all of us. But historically, funding for open source projects has been a very difficult task. And it is pretty cool that Bitcoin seems to enable certain funding models that didn't exist before, because all of a sudden, these open source operators are able to accept a global money without a third party in a trust minimized way. So because that addition of Bitcoin, all of a sudden, there's all these cool different models that are popping up where you can still fork the code. You can use the code however you want. You can run it yourself. But the actual operators and maintainers of the code have some kind of value add service that generates sats. Is pretty novel and pretty new, and it's really cool watching it all develop,
Yeah, the real power of Bitcoin and open source software together is what makes the project so powerful. And every open source project contributes to the ecosystem in its own unique way, right? Like you'll have Evan making his Lightning wallet, or mempool, or bisq, or all of these projects, and they all fill their own use case, but all of them together is like the cypherpunk arsenal. They all build on top of Bitcoin, and there's so many companies that will do closed source for example, just the mining dashboard. All of the mining dashboards we looked at were all closed source. So
Right.
by making an open source one, I kind of feel that now nobody needs to reinvent the wheel 10 times.
Right. They can just fork yours.
Sure. And that's the beauty of open source, right? And the world runs on top of open source software like this.
So, I mean, my last dispatch, the topic of, I apologize to the freaks if the audio quality was poor. It was in person in a warehouse in Miami. And it just had really bad acoustics and whatnot. But it was a great conversation, especially for those who joined us in person. We had 100 ride or die freaks there. They each paid sats to come, which included drinks, but also helped support the show and keep it ad free. Talking about one of my favorite topics, which is open source licenses. And we had a couple guys on there that are really big on completely unrestricted open source licenses, like MIT, or the unlicensed. I mean, we had Paul on there who's big on that. Evan, Clutis. I mean, you mentioned Evan was in multiple panels in the open source stage. Like all the ride or die Citadel Dispatch guys were. And we had Tony who also did 2 panels. And they're all pro MIT guys. And then we had NVK who likes a really nice restricted license. And then so you guys sit in the middle. You have a GPL license.
Well, yeah, so you mentioned many projects. That's an interesting comparison. I think it really depends on what license is the best. I mean, this is a whole like huge discussion in itself. I think you've had entire episodes, like 3
Well,
hours.
literally, the last one was an entire episode devoted
Right.
to it. Right.
So
Favorite topic.
yeah, and for NVK, he's making hardware, right? So maybe the MIT license is not a good fit for his business model, whereas for some projects, like obviously Bitcoin Core needs to be MIT licensed because
Completely unrestricted. Anyone can do whatever they want with it.
exactly, because that's a very low level protocol level building block.
Foundational.
Everyone needs Bitcoin Core to use anything
Right.
with Bitcoin. And also projects like Rust Lightning or LDK by the
Foundational.
Right. Whereas projects like bisq and mempool use a license called the AGPL, or in mempool's case, you can choose AGPL or GPL. But the idea is, I guess, created by Stallman in the 80s, decades ago. This guy figured it out that in order for software to remain free, it has to accomplish what he coined as the 4 freedoms. And you can go read his long form essays, and he's written length about it. So I won't try and do it justice now. But essentially, the GNU licenses that Stallman pioneered are much more complex than the MIT license or the BSD license or the unlicensed, which MIT license says you can just do whatever the hell you want. It's out there. But the GPL is quite strict, relatively speaking, saying that if you fork the project, your changes need to also be free software. They also need to stay under this same license. And so, for example, if you fork Bitcoin Core and you make changes to it or integrate it into your other code, that's your business and nobody can say anything about it. But if you fork the mempool project and you add some feature, then the mempool open source project can take those feature additions that you made and merge it upstream back into the mempool project. And so that keeps the free software free.
Whatever resulting modifications happen or whatever is used with that code needs to remain the same license. It needs to remain open.
Right. And the GPL and the AGPL, which is even more strictly enforcing this freedom, is somewhat controversial with large enterprises like Google. And I think Square also bans use of the AGPL because the lawyers are, for whatever reason, paranoid about using this AGPL code.
Well, there's an argument that and this is actually the argument one of the reasons I like it is it's almost like weaponized code. It's a open source poison pill. So like if you use that code, unless you're just completely breaking the law, and this was an argument that I thought was really interesting in the last discussion, which is ultimately all of these licenses require a state to basically enforce them. But unless you're willing to just completely break the law and just keep it closed and just not tell anyone and hope you don't get caught, using GPL code, AGPL code, is essentially this poison pill where you need to make everything open with it.
That's a hot topic these days.
But so you said Square doesn't like it, but they gave you a grant.
Oh yeah, I mean, we have a dual license, so you can. So even though Square doesn't like AGPL, we also make it available under GPL if you don't like the AGPL. It's just that we would prefer AGPL.
But they don't really like GPL either, right?
No, I think the lawyers are only paranoid about AGPL.
So what's the difference between AGPL and GPL?
It's one paragraph in the license, and it basically says if you make the service, if you make the software, if you use a software to run like a website, and that website is available on the internet, then you also need to make the whole stack of that website available as open source under
Right.
this license. And so that's a very oversimplified explanation, but they're worried that.
So then it's really a poison pill where like everything needs to be open.
Right. And with GPL, it's less strict. So for example, with GPL, you could run, I mean, Linux is GPL version 2, right? So you can run Linux on the TV here right next to the table, but whatever other software you run on top of Linux is a separate piece of software.
Right. So just that kernel needs to be
Exactly.
open,
Exactly.
not the dependencies.
Exactly. And
Or yeah, the opposite.
right. So you can have lawyers argue what constitutes the same program, and there's been a lot of debate about this, but AGPL is much more poisonous, to use your terminology, right? In the sense that if you used any other web server software in this, then you would have to make that open source as well. And so mempool is an application, not like a protocol layer. It's a web application that has its own community and integrations and everything. And because it's a standalone app, also just like bisq, we felt the AGPL is the best license for the project, essentially. And if you look at other, I guess, community projects like PeerTube or Mastodon or bisq, which has a huge community around it, and they're all standalone applications, web applications. They all use AGPL. They all came to the same conclusion. So Square wouldn't be able to run a Mastodon or a PeerTube, for example, under their policy.
Got it. And then just to think about this in practical terms. So like, do you know what is the open source license for Unix? Is it MIT?
Well, Unix is like a family of operating systems now, right? I mean, the original Unix is probably from like the 60s.
Right.
I think there's like AT&T Bell Labs. So now nobody runs like the actual Unix operating system. They use like derivatives of it. Like, for example, FreeBSD is BSD license.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Linux is GPL version 2. Every OS is so old that they set their license decades ago.
That makes sense. But basically, like if you're in a situation where you have like a completely free and open license, like a MIT license with no restrictions, then in practice, what could happen is like a big tech company can basically just take it, keep it in a closed source stack, make some modifications, and not share it with the rest of the world. That's the trade-off.
Right.
But on the other hand, people can build on it in a more free way. That's the back and forth trade-off, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for hours. There's so many trade-offs. There's so many, attack vectors.
One of my favorite topics because it's a very nerd hot button issue. Like people have very strong opinions on it. It's like arguing about politics, but a lot more fun.
Yeah, if you run into Rootsall in a bar in Germany, you'd be talking for hours with the guy about.
All you have to do is just like cough in your hand and say licenses, and he'll just go.
Yeah, Rootsall is maintainer of Raspberry Blitz project.
And shout out to him, by the way. Him and Ben Ark really they helped out a lot in terms of the workshop experience at the open source stage, and I really appreciate it. They're great dudes.
The whole Fulmo team, they had these really cool devices.
And Fulmo himself.
Yeah, they it's like for like $5 or something. They made this device that you can build in just a few minutes with I guess easy to obtain parts that can essentially receive. Was it on-chain?
It's offline lightning payments.
Yeah, it's like offline lightning payments. So the device doesn't connect to the internet at all, but just using math and cryptography.
Well, it uses so the phone that pays is connected to the internet, right? So your phone's connected to cell signal, and then you pay an LN URL, And then once you pay the LNURL, it shows a PIN. And if that PIN is the same that the merchant sees, then you get whatever goods you have. It confirms the payment without the merchant needing to be online. Now, people say, okay, well, why would I need a situation where the cell phone obviously already has internet, but the terminal doesn't? Well, Ben Ark had a rudimentary vending machine, and with the vending machine, it actually has a PIN pad, so you don't need a merchant there. And after you pay it, you get the PIN, you put the PIN in, and then your goods come out of the vending machine. And that makes deployment way, way easier, because all of a sudden, all you need is power for the vending machine. The vending machine doesn't need internet access. Only the payer needs internet access. So you don't have to pay a subscription for the internet or whatnot.
Yeah, and if you've ever been to El Salvador, the mom and pop shops all over accepting Bitcoin Lightning, they don't even have a smartphone. They just have a piece of paper with a QR code on it.
An LNURL.
No, not even an LNURL.
Oh, they were using the Bitcoin Beach wallet or whatever?
Right, which is just their username, essentially.
Right.
And the way they would know if you sent them funds or not is they would look at your phone, which is obviously not a secure way to.
Right, it's a trust trade-off. They can be lying to you.
Right. So this device would
Massive improvement.
Yeah, in El Salvador, and you wouldn't have to use the government's like Chiva wallet. You wouldn't need a smartphone. You would just need
Right.
this very, very inexpensive.
And then I guess like another major use case of it is something like the conference, where like everyone has internet issues at big events, lots of people. And just to not have all these different lightning payments. I mean, one of the cool parts about the conference was anything at the conference, including beer and food and whatnot, could be bought with lightning. But the first day they were having Wi-Fi issues. So lightning payments were failing because of just straight up Wi-Fi issues. And that got sorted in the next 2 days after that. But if you had offline LNPOS, then you wouldn't have to deal with that issue. Now, the major trade-off right now is not all wallets support spending to LNURL. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole. I mean, I remember we had Maulers in town, and I excitingly told him, I was like, we got these LPOS systems. You can buy beer at this brewery in POS. And he's like, man, are you trolling me? I was like, why? And he's like, because everyone's angry at me for not supporting LNURL. You can't pay these terminals. I was like, nope, not intentional. Did not realize.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah, awesome. I had one more question for you. Oh, there's a question in the chat from High Side for you, Wiz. How much time do we have before a free market is necessary to keep up network security? I would guess we have around 10 to 15 years left.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's not going to be like a black or white thing where it's just all of a sudden we have a fee market. Because as we saw last year, when the market was pumping hard and everyone's moving money around to trade on exchanges or bucket shops or whatever they're doing, the fees surged up and they stayed congested for, I think it was like 6.5 months last year. So after the market calmed down a bit, the mempool emptied out and it's been empty ever since. So when are we going to see a fee market? It won't be just here today, gone tomorrow kind of thing. It's going something that will continuously be more congested over the next 10 to 15 years until some point where it's mostly full all the time, and then clearing out every day or clearing out every week or clearing out every month will become a more and more rare occurrence, right?
Right. I mean, we've seen that in periods of high fees where it's like on Sundays it clears because people don't transact as much. I think the conference last year, like everyone went down to Miami and cleared because people stopped transacting.
Yeah, like bisq traders would always trade on Sunday for a long time because that had the lowest fees. So just in the interest of saving money.
And I mean, Lightning definitely adds another element to it. I mean, the perfect example is at the conference, right? All the payments were Lightning enabled. So those transactions aren't hitting the chain. They're essentially batched transactions. If you want to look at it from a Bitcoin macro lens. And in times of high fees, people might be more likely to switch to a Lightning or maybe even a Liquid. But
sure, if you want to open Lightning channels, Sunday's a great day to do it, Sunday night.
Or when fees are low, unless you want PTLCs, and then we got to close all our Lightning channels to migrate. But that's a whole nother.
think there was another question.
Yeah, if the parent, I think we answered this. If the parent has been dropped because the fee is below the mempool limit, this is from Orange Surf. If the parent has been dropped because the fee is below the mempool limit, could the parent not broadcast a new transaction spending the same UTXO with the higher fee without RBF? We did not answer that.
You would have to double spend your own first transaction, and yes, I've done that before, and it's tricky, but it can work. But you can't just tell like your mom to double spend a transaction out of a wallet.
Well, also some wallets just don't make it. Like, I guess, and one of the things I look forward to is, if I look forward to, I mean, I still think the jury's out if we're going to have a sustained high fee market.
No,
Partially
mempool fees
because
are meant to pump forever. That's
yeah,
what you
partially because I just had so much pie on my face last time, so now I'm trying to stay humble about fees. And I would just go back to Wiz's previous answer about how long do we need to see fees increase? Because if purchasing power keeps going up, and purchasing power keeps increasing, then even though the subsidy is halving, right, on that 4-year halving cycle, each subsidy in purchasing power terms is higher than the previous one,
Yes.
significantly higher, to the point where, we have 2 million Bitcoin left to mine. At time of issuance, those 2 million Bitcoin being paid off as a subsidy to miners will most definitely be higher than the previous 19 million.
Right. So, quick example: when the block subsidy reward was 50 Bitcoin, Bitcoin was worth about $100. So, if you solved the block,
Right.
you would make what, $5,000 USD.
Right.
But now, even though the block reward is halved multiple times to only 6.25, at the current price, that's about $250,000.
Right.
So, even though the amount of Bitcoin is much less,
the purchasing power of the reward is significantly higher.
right?
So I think that puts it off. I mean, the other thing is we do have the difficulty adjustment, and there's always a question of how much security is enough security. So, in situations where miners do not think it's profitable for them to mine, they will pull off their miners, and then the remaining miners will be more profitable. And at the same time, people will be raising their fees to be included in blocks. So there is a dynamic there that should make it so it's never unprofitable to mine. It's just who is it profitable for, rather than just across the board being unprofitable mine by design, by this mix of the difficulty adjustment and the dynamic
Price.
fee market.
Yeah.
I lost track. So there was another question, but that previous question. Oh, right. The point I was trying to make earlier was we haven't seen a high sustained fee market. If we do see a high sustained fee market, there's going to be a lot of UX and protocol things that change because developers will be focused on that pain point. One of the things we see with Bitcoin is robust because it's like almost this open bug bounty program, but that only happens when the system gets stressed and you see the pain points. And one of the things I talk about a lot with El Salvador is, yes, it's a country of 6 million people, but bringing low income 6 million people all onto a Bitcoin standard at the same time where they're transacting a lot, all of a sudden exposed a lot of pain points in day-to-day transactions where people weren't making that many day-to-day transactions before. So wallet developers and protocol developers did not see those pain points. They see the pain points, then they attempt to mitigate the pain points. And it's going to be the same for a sustained high fee market. If we see one where there's going to be all these pain points that emerge that we never really noticed before because we just weren't in that stressed environment. And when that happens, you might see wallets offer the ability for you to easily double spend a transaction that gets dropped from mempools, for example.
Yeah, exactly. There's been this common misconception that you can always broadcast a transaction for 1 sat per VByte.
Right.
Like, shout out to our friend Catan, who's always tweeting about this.
Well, he
And
won that round.
well, but during that 6.5 month stretch last year, I think
We trolled him a lot, and then all of a sudden 1 sat per byte got into the next block, and then now he's been trolling us since.
But during that high fee sustained time, he had to transact Bitcoin, and he at one point tweeted, he's like, yeah, I guess you have to use 4 or 5 sats per VByte or something. So that was the point, was that to go to your point about the wallet's UI changing. A lot of people made these assumptions and they coded wallets or exchanges. Like, for example, Unchained Capital when they were doing their transactions, I guess, were using too low of a fee, and the transactions to their customers got stuck in the mempool. But these guys are awesome. They called us up and they said, "Hey, we want to sponsor you guys. We just want some help with our, fee estimation." And so now they're using the mempool space API for their fee estimation, and they always get included in the next block. Same with Exodus Wallet, right? They're using our fee estimation for very, very high priority transactions, and it works well. Of course, now the mempool's empty.
Mempools are empty.
My mempool is empty.
There's no such thing as the. Yeah.
When I say the mempool, I mean my mempool.
Okay. So
Not Rod's mempool.
let that be clear. Going forward, whenever he says the mempool, Mr. Wiz over here is talking about his mempool. So we have another question from Orange Surf. This was one of the earlier questions that I noted, which I thought was really good. Why would an out-of-band payment be lower than just paying the miners in band with the normal fee?
Well, like I said, if you don't know when the next block is going to get mined, right? So
Right.
if you make a transaction now, even if you're using the high priority fee on mempool space, there just might not be any blocks mined for the next 2 hours. It happens. It's just variance in mining. And so during that 2-hour period,
the target is 10 minutes, but it can be however long. We've seen long periods with no blocks.
Exactly. And so your transaction in that 2-hour time period could get buried deep in the mempool, and new transactions are surging in so that your transaction gets more and more and more buried and then eventually purged in the worst case scenario. So sure, if you get a block mined in 10 minutes later and used a high fee and you didn't get bumped out of that next block, then yes, you will be confirmed. But quite often, if you're trying to estimate it, what would the best fee, the optimal fee be? It's a moving target and it's hard to hit, and you can't always hit it just because.
Especially when like demand is high. Like if I've been in situations where I paid on the lower end of a fee and it just keeps going on me.
Right.
And it almost lets you do a more calculated transaction, right? Because you pay the lower fee. I mean, the out-of-band payment allows you to. You can pay a lower fee. So like what happens is you end up, in practice, what happens is if you really wanted to confirm, you end up overpaying just to guarantee that you get into a block. With this out-of-band payment, you pay a lower fee and then you just instantly pay whatever the exact market price is to get into a block, right? So
in that example,
you pay the low, you basically pay the lowest you could practically pay to get into a block because it's on demand rather than a queue system, right?
Yes. So in that example, mempool space could become like this oracle for what the price was to get into that block at the moment it was mined. And
at the exact moment,
right? Because the fee market changes so quickly. And then whatever you paid on the fees, even if it was too much or too little, we could credit or debit you the difference. And mining pools could, make these type of agreements with people who create a lot of transactions. For example, there used to be something every day called BitMEX o'clock, where BitMEX would just,
it was like 9 a.m. Eastern,
right? Whenever
they would do all their transactions,
they would just broadcast like hilariously unoptimized, huge multi.
They literally only did one withdrawal per day, and it was at the same time every day.
And it was huge. It was like several blocks full. So if you were even in the next block ready to get mined, boom, you're suddenly buried. And I think they've fixed this maybe a year or so ago, so we don't have BitMEX o'clock anymore. But anybody who's watching the mempool remembers this event. And they would pay way too much fees. Like they would pay millions and millions of sats more than they had to for like a simple, relatively low fee transaction they could have gotten away with. But just because they wanted their customers to get that money right away, confirmed, they would overpay by quite a bit. And Binance and all the large exchanges typically do the same thing. They overpay way higher than they need to just to make sure that they get into the next block.
Right. So we have another question. This one from Mark Usat. There are companies that use GPL software but don't publish their source code. The license says that you have to make the source code available. What can be done individually on request with the requesting party, not necessarily actively published alongside derived works?
Well, that's just software piracy, right? If you break the GPL license and you don't publish source code, then you are pirating that free software, ironically. And you would have to catch them, just like Hollywood has to catch when you torrent a movie or something. You would have to to somehow find out that they're pirating your software, which, yeah, if they never publish it, then you could never know. But
Right.
if you're just a home user and you hack on the mempool code on your Raspberry Pi, nobody would ever know about that.
Or care. Who would care?
Or care, exactly. But there are many cases when the GNU, the Free Software Foundation, sues a large company like Cisco because they've decompiled the Cisco operating system and found the GNU libraries in there and say, yeah, take them to court where you're violating the GPL. And they would force Cisco to open source all of their forked libraries.
It's really just like it's mostly a threat to like large public tech companies that you have this massive liability if you do it, right?
Exactly. It's to keep the software free from large enterprises that would otherwise pirate it, basically.
Would you say that in a perfect world, there's no such thing as piracy and there's just no enforcement of this stuff, or do you prefer to have the state there to enforce these things?
Well,
Juicy question.
yeah, that's a deep topic. I'm afraid to answer this. Matt will call me a statist.
I mean, no matter what, you're going to get canceled by half of the audience. That's why it's a good question.
I think as a cypherpunk, you need to use the rules of the system against the system itself. Maybe a good example is 3D printed guns in the United States. Obviously, the government doesn't like if people can just print their own guns. And whoever's publishing the 3D CAD files to print the guns can just go to court and play their game and put on the table, yeah, First Amendment, Second Amendment, and they win in court.
Because code is speech.
Exactly. And so there are instances when the most hardcore cypherpunks are the ones like Adam back in the 90s going to the Supreme Court, or what was his name? DJB, Daniel J. Bernstein. They went to the Supreme Court and fought the US government that code is, there's no reason to block people from exporting cryptography because code is free speech, and they won. And so some of the most respected cypherpunks actually used the state's own system against the state and won.
Right.
And so to say, I mean, look at open source.
Right. But so I would say there's a strong argument that probably most people don't disagree with, that if you have these systems that already exist, kind of don't hate the player, hate the game, there's a strong argument to use those systems to basically further our interests and to protect ourselves. But my question is really beyond that. Would you prefer that those systems didn't exist in the first place, right? Like in a post-Bitcoin open source world, where we're fractured into many independent city-states or citadels, there won't be widespread, easy enforcement of any of this shit. I think that's a massive net benefit for everybody. The transition might be messy, but I think that's because everyone can just build on this open infrastructure.
Right. The current free software movement is heavily dependent on the state to enforce that. And so if it did not exist in this hypothetical situation in a post-Bitcoin,
then all software is
MIT licenses.
It's just completely open, unrestricted.
It's the anarchy of the internet, right? And then
which seems to me like a massive net benefit. I mean, it obviously has trade-offs, but
right. But in the meantime, I don't want a large company to take free software and make it not free. And so if we can use the state system to keep free software free in the meantime, then I guess that's the world that we live in right now. I mean, obviously you can go to China and pirate stuff and you won't get in trouble.
I mean, it's like literally the government strategy, right?
Or Russia too now, right? They just, any airline jets that were in Russia owned by foreign companies, they're like, no, these are ours now, right?
Right.
So there are already places where this intellectual property enforcement system does not exist, and you have this anarchy of freedom and information. And if you go to places in China, they'll print any book you want in a very nice, professionally printed hardcover book, right?
So that to me is like the pinnacle of open information, right?
Sure.
And if you're a good content creator or author, then you should still be able to figure out some kind of way to sustainably monetize your work.
Right. It's like trying to monetize the mempool open source project. You can't really control the distribution of the source code. Source code is free.
I mean, you still see, and you see like, I believe Andreas did it. A bunch of other Bitcoin authors did it, where they provide the PDF for free. That they've self-published, and they've still made off of the book sales because people want to support the author, but also the information is free available to access, right?
I think this is just all voluntarism, right? If you want to support an artist, you donate. This is how the mempool open source project is funded, from donations directly from the community.
Right.
We give away all the software for free. The website is totally free with no advertising. It's just 100% funded by the community based on the they're voluntarily donating. They don't have to give us money. And you're kind of supporting the creators so that they continue, or you're paying for the next version of the software, right?
Right.
In a way. So,
and that it's secure and robust and
right. So in the future
maintained,
world, which are arguably mempool is already living in, yeah, we're living in this post Bitcoinization world where everything is voluntarism. But at the end of the day, we still have to use this copyright to enforce open source licenses or trademarks to, we don't want people stealing or pirating our logo on t-shirts. We want to make the mempool shirts.
So. Oh, you want to talk about my favorite explorer? Was it mempoolbch.com or something?
Oh yeah, I mean many
the Bcash mempool clone.
Yeah, many shitcoins fork the mempool project and make their own shitcoin explorers, where we have to very politely ask them to not put our logo or our profile photos on your website. I mean, yeah, basically, if you fork an open source project, you need to call it something else. You can't.
Well, like specifically in mempool's case, mempool.space is trademarked.
Yeah.
Right. And the logo.
Right. So the source code is copyrighted, and then we have an open source license that code to make it available for everyone. And just logos are trademarked in the United States and other countries, and then we put like a open trademark policy on those trademarks, so that essentially if you run an unmodified copy of the mempool open source project, then you're permitted to use the mempool logo so that everyone knows what that is. But if you fork the project and put Dogecoin on there, or Bcash, or some shitcoin of the week, yeah, you can't put our logo on there because people trust that logo to be a Bitcoin explorer, not a shitcoin explorer.
Right. The logo is an open source, is a brand, not an open source project.
Exactly. And for example, Linux is a registered trademark of Linus, right?
Right.
And so if you fork Linux, that's one of the ways they monetize the project, actually, is the royalties from trademark usage. So if you fork Linux and you make Wiz Linux, I would have to pay a royalty to Linus for the use of the trademark, but not for the code, because the code is open.
Right.
So if you fork the Linux kernel and you call it something else,
Winix.
No, that's probably piss off Microsoft or Linus or something, right? But I think there was like Microsoft Windows, someone like Windows, yeah,
Windows,
Wiznix, yeah. So yeah, if it's not confusingly similar, you can not have to pay royalties, and just like you're free to fork the mempool open source project, but then you can't call it the mempool open source project. That's our project name. Right. You have to call it something else. It's free software, but you can't call it what we call it.
Got it. Interesting. So we are at an hour and a half. I mean, to discuss bisq. So let's discuss bisq. I mean, a lot of the freaks are already aware of bisq. I talk about bisq all the time. It's fucking awesome project. You're heavily involved. bisq is software that you can freely run on your computer and connect to other people in a P2P way to trade Bitcoin for either fiat or shitcoins.
Yeah, bisq is a great project and a great concept made by very, very smart people. And I think everyone loves bisq because the message is so strong. The message is that KYC is the illicit activity. We I mean, bisq is an open source software program that connects you to other people running bisq, so that you can trade Bitcoin peer to peer with other Bitcoiners directly, without other trusted third parties knowing about your transaction details or even your name.
Right. So in practice, it's like instead of using Cash App to broker the transaction, which is a centralized regulated entity that could spy on you, or a Gemini or Kraken or something, bisq allows two peers to connect directly to each other and exchange only the information that they want to exchange.
Right. bisq is 100% routed over Tor. Everyone just has an onion address and connects to each other in the app, and you can make an offer or take someone else's offer to trade Bitcoin for fiat in a number of payment methods all over the world. I think in the United States, U.S. postal money order or Zelle or a few other methods are supported. I mean, you could also meet in person and exchange cash, or I think Amazon gift cards are popular now. There's a number of ways to trade Bitcoin privately and peer-to-peer using bisq, and it's just a beautiful app.
Awesome. How long have you been working with the bisq project?
Probably, I think it was slightly before mempool, so maybe like 3.5 years ago. But the project is very old. The project is probably, geez, must be like 7 years or older now. It's one of the early Bitcoin
Yeah, it was like
projects.
2013 or 2014, maybe.
Right around 2013. Yeah, sounds about right. So, and even before then, I know they were thinking about it for a long time too, because it started from what we called Satoshi Square, where you would go to a Bitcoin meetup, and
I remember that.
yeah, there was not a lot of exchanges back then. There were not a lot of infrastructure where you could trade. So you
And
would
the largest one had just gotten crushed.
you would just show up at a meetup and say, "Hey, I'm looking to buy Bitcoin," like out loud in the room,
Right.
and someone would say, "Yeah, I'm looking to sell," and you would just open outcry trading.
But they even had like some were more formalized, right? Where it was like almost like a mercantile exchange pit or whatever, where like someone would be standing up on a podium and then people would be yelling orders and they'd be yelling bids.
A form of peer-to-peer trading. So the digital version of that was the idea for bisq, or BitSquare at the time. So from Satoshi Square, the founders of the Square project tried to implement that same energy, and they created this essentially like a node on a peer-to-peer network, on the bisq peer-to-peer network, where you could make or take offers to trade Bitcoin, and you can set directly with the counterparty. You don't even need to know who they are. I mean, you could set up what's the cool way to do it? A Wyoming LLC with a PO box, and use U.S. postal money
Right.
order, and then nobody knows.
I think Econo Alchemist has a guide for that.
Right.
Either he or Diverter does.
Yeah, and there's some excellent guides out there on how to trade private on bisq, and
because
whole,
even centralized party that's collecting information, your counterparty in every transaction is going to get information on you, right? That's why some people set up LLCs. They like the postal orders because it doesn't have any bank account information tied to you. You just pay cash at a post office.
right. There's very little, and so the obvious questions
It's
are,
as much information as you want to provide, right? Because it's up to the peers how they want to use it.
So the obvious questions when I tell someone about bisq are, well, what if the other guy scams me? What if I send him money, he doesn't send me the Bitcoin? And bisq,
which is the key problem.
right? So bisq has this decentralized organization, the bisq DAO, to resolve trade disputes essentially and manage the parameters of the peer-to-peer network. For example, if Bob and Alice are agreeing on some terms to buy one Bitcoin for $1,000, if Bob wires the money to Alice on whatever payment method they agree on, but Alice doesn't release the Bitcoin, first of all, it's in a 2 of 2 multi-sig. Previously, it was a 2 of 3 multi-sig, where an arbitrator from bisq would hold one of the keys. But early on, we realized this is an obvious security flaw, because the arbitrator could just go to bisq and take every offer, and now they hold 2 keys.
Right.
So the newer version of bisq now uses a 2 of 2 multi-sig with a time lock. And this way, only Alice and Bob have the keys to settle their transaction on their own. However, if some time goes by, which is either 10 or 20 days, depending on the payment method, if they cannot settle this trade on their own, then the funds will essentially be sent to the bisq DAO. And well, first of all, they'll start mediation. So before the funds go anywhere, mediator will just join the chat, or not join the chat. They'll make separate new chats, so they can't even see what you guys discussed previously. But the mediator will see the details of the trade and talk to Alice and Bob and try and work it out. Because usually newbies make mistakes, or they mess up their node, or whatever reason that the mail got slow, and so they didn't get it. But eventually, the mediator helps them out, or if they can't resolve it with the mediation, then it would go to arbitration, where one of the parties would broadcast this time lock transaction after 10 or 20 days. Funds would go to bisq, and then the mediator would make a suggested payout from the bisq DAO. Alice showed me, enough sufficient evidence to where she sent the U.S. postal money order. She has a photo of the envelope and the receipt from the mailbox. And I checked on the post office website that it was indeed cashed at this post office for this amount. So I suggest that, she gets the payout. And usually, this combined with security deposits is enough to prevent any scams, or disincentivize scams anyway, because a scammer doesn't like to lose their own funds. A scammer
Right.
doesn't like to risk their own money. So if they have to put up a security deposit, and if they try to scam someone and they lose their security deposit, well, they don't come back.
Right. You're adding a cost to the scam.
Right. So the game theory and the incentives are all there to resolve disputes. And then because of that dispute resolution process and the security deposits, the game theory is that scammers don't really, maybe like once a month.
Right. It's
maybe.
not perfect.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's been mitigated enough
Right.
without using any form of KYC or.
Right. The alternative is a centralized third party that is KYCing everyone and has huge fraud departments and lawyers and all this bullshit.
Exactly.
People don't get access to markets because of it, and they can't.
And the bisq
Great.
network bypasses all of that and just says, okay, what are the 3 threat models? They're always security, privacy, and censorship. So for the security side, arbitration can resolve this scam risk and disincentivize it with security deposits and the ability to confiscate them. And privacy risk, only the 2 transaction parties, Alice and Bob, will know about the transaction. If they have a dispute, then a mediator would also see those transaction details. But for the most part, it's as private as it can get. And then censorship, because there is no bisq company, there is no bisq servers, it's all peer-to-peer over Tor. It's extremely censorship resistant and unregulatable.
Awesome. So, I mean, one of the cool panels that I put you on for the open source stage was the DEX panel. And CSU Wildcat was on there. He's working with Square on his decentralized identifiers.
TBD is what it's called.
Right, no, but he's working specifically on DIDs, his decentralized identifiers, which are going to be integrated into their TBD protocol, which is basically the open network decentralized exchange protocol that allows you to trade Bitcoin for other things, whether that's fiat or sandwiches, or I use cars as an example. What are your thoughts on so bisq doesn't have, first of all, if you haven't listened to that panel, which day was that?
I think it was day 2, the first general admission.
Right. So if you go to all 3 open source stages are on the podcast feed, and there's actually timestamps where you can click the individual panels. But if you go to day 2, click their individual panel, your podcast app should just pull you right to that moment. But what are your thoughts on using basically a reputation system as an additional fraud layer? Like and we've seen centralized reputation systems, stuff like eBay or Airbnb, where if you've used Airbnb a lot, it's always more risky to book from a host that doesn't have a bunch of reviews. But if a host has 60 good reviews and you're like, wow, this host is awesome, you feel more comfortable renting a room from them.
Yeah, that's a good question. And obviously, there's going to be trade-offs with the reputation system, because if you're optimizing for maximum privacy, you would not want a reputation system, because a reputation system is literally linking all of your previous transactions together
Inherently, by
into
design.
one single identity where you
Right.
can see everything they've been doing. So bisq does not have any form of a reputation system or, even an identity system, really. There are a few mechanisms in there where, like, the hash of a payment account can have some street cred on the bisq network.
Like a hash of a bank account or something.
Right. And that could be considered a decentralized identifier if you want to call it that. But it's nothing like the newer protocols, and where everything is based around these decentralized identifiers. I mean, bisq doesn't want to have an identity system, right? I mean, we've discussed having one Tor onion hostname per transaction. Right now, it uses the same onion, but it's very easy to delete it and make a new one. The cost of creating a new onion hostname is basically free. So if you want anonymity and you want privacy, you don't want a reputation system.
Right. There's a
TBDEX,
trade-off there.
yeah, TBDEX has the problem of being developed by a centralized regulated company, and so obviously they need to do KYC, AML compliance, and so therefore their protocol implementation is obviously going to focus around.
Well, the cool part of TBD to me is very similar to the cool part of bisq to me, which is if you create this open protocol, you can allow people to use it however they want to use it. So there could be what affects to KYC compliant transactions on TBD, where both entities require your DID or whatever we want to call it, your reputation to have hash commitments from some kind of KYC authority, right? That has maybe checked your passport and checked all this information for you, and then basically hashed a reference into your DID that says, this person is who they say they are, and they talk about all these different things where it can be more robust than typical current KYC systems, where it's like they're above a certain age, or they live in this state, or they're not a felon, or like, but not the specific. This is their selfie in their passport or whatever. But then also you could have transactors in that open protocol that are maybe they don't require that in-depth information, but they just want to know which country you live in, or maybe even less than that. They just want to know what your social media account is or something, and that is hashed into your DID, right? So the idea, on my understanding of their idea, is that it's this open protocol where there'll be different layers of how much people want in terms of reputation or KYC. And it just comes down to the individual transactors. But it's interesting the different trade-off between just no reputation system, period, and working around that with basically the security deposit model that bisq has versus a reputation system.
Right. And I think and in fact, the first time we discussed this, it was years ago, I think on TFTC with Uncle Marty, we talked about with Steve also was there, and you asked Steve similar question.
First time I ever met you in person. It was the start of a beautiful friendship.
And Steve had a very elegant answer, I thought, to this question. And he says, why have reputation systems? All you really need is the integrity, right? Because what is the actual threat model for why to have a reputation system is the first in the first place, right? If you know that you're going to get paid on the trade, either through the ordinary honest way, or if you do, unfortunately, have a dispute that the bisq DAO will make it up to you somehow, then why would you care about the reputation? If the integrity is there, then there is no need for such a reputation system, and it is only going to hurt your privacy. And sure, if you with a decentralized identifier system, you could make throwaway identities, one for every transaction. You can do that.
But you get penalized in that system because, like I said with Airbnb, like by design, because there's a reputation system, hosts that have good reputations on the network, or even guests that have it goes both ways, that have good reputations on the network, are more likely to get matches with peers or get higher prices on their Airbnb rentals because
I think Airbnb has a very, very different threat model from trading Bitcoin online, right? I mean, if you're physically going to be in somebody else's house, you probably want some assurance that they're not a murderer or something, right? And likewise, an Uber ride, for example, it's a peer-to-peer, centrally managed peer-to-peer riding system. You want to make sure
Right.
you want to have some assurance from the Uber company that this guy is legit and not gonna
drive you into like a sketchy corner of the city and
right.
rob you or do worse.
So for those threat models, sure, reputation system might make sense. But when you're purely doing a financial trade of sats for cash, you do not need a reputation system. And bisq has proven this,
But
right?
I mean, cash is different, right? Because cash is instantly settled. There's all these fraud elements that happen in the traditional financial system. It's the fiat side that causes issues. Like, I mean, especially like if you look at, I would argue, if you're trading Bitcoin for shitcoins, you really don't need a reputation system because it's all just cryptographically verified, instantly settled.
Exactly.
Right. And those shitcoins could be stable coins or whatever,
Exactly.
tokens, whatever it is, instantly settled. The fraud issues you see they come from the fiat system and the inefficiencies of
Correct.
the fiat system. And
like someone could write someone a bad check, or
right. Or they could steal someone's account and send you fraudulent payments that get charged back and then get reversed. Or
right. So
like imagine someone gets access to someone's bank account, so then they instantly buy a bunch of Bitcoin on bisq with that bank account. The bank then realizes what happened and just reverses the transaction on their side.
yes, some payment methods do have chargeback risk,
Right.
and so bisq has this duty to mitigate those chargeback risks. So, for example, and our bank transfer system is not chargebackable. So there is no chargeback risk. If I wire you money, it's instant and done, and the transaction cannot be reversed at all ever without like a court order or something very, very difficult to obtain. Whereas in the US, it's almost a joke. You can just call up the credit card. Oh yeah, my thing got hacked. Can you just charge back that money? And they'll do it.
Right.
And so in the US, one of the popular payment methods, Zelle, does have some chargeback risk. And so to mitigate this, the bisq developers came up with this clever idea where the hash of your payment account data gets propagated through the bisq peer-to-peer network so that every node knows the age of your payment account. And so if your account age is older than 30 days or something like this, and other people have cryptographically signed it who were signed. So it's basically if your payment account was vouched for by another vouched person, then
because they made a successful trade with you, right?
Right, and it did not go to arbitration.
So that is a reputation system in that regard.
In an anonymous way.
And then so if there's fraud with that Zelle account, then does that person get blackballed from the system?
Exactly. So that's the mitigations, right? So
without knowing the specific Zelle account, but
correct.
you know the hash, which is a unique identifier that can't be reversed.
Correct. And so that's, if you want to call it a reputation system, sure, it's more of a decentralized web of trust or blacklist or something. And so if an arbitrator or mediator on bisq sees some fraud and chargeback, then yeah, that payment account is now nuked. And that's the mitigation, right? And also the bisq DAO can always reimburse traders out of their own DAO funds, which has happened in the past. A couple of years ago, there was this security vulnerability in the bisq app where I think it was like six traders on the Monero to BTC market got some funds stolen through a very elaborate attack where bisq wasn't verifying the correct payout address or something. And they stole probably like almost $200,000 worth of Monero, I think. And so the bisq DAO did a proposal. All right, should we, divert the trading fee revenue to pay these guys back? And they did. They got their $200,000 back or whatever it was. I mean, it took like a whole year to pay them back, but they got made whole.
So, I mean, you've been working with bisq for over 3 years now. bisq is obviously an extremely vital project in a world where we're seeing more KYC go throughout. KYC is just insidious. It just enters every aspect of our lives. You have all these centralized parties that are getting regulated and cracked down on if they're not implementing these stringent regulations, these burdensome regulations that don't actually prevent crime because criminals use bought or stolen information and get around it in other ways. Just hurts honest individuals. So we're seeing all these crackdowns happen. And I will say, before I get to this question, that whether TBD is successful or things like RoboSats or even HODL HODL, which is a more centralized trade-off balance. We want as many options for Bitcoiners as possible. I mean, at the end of the day, that makes the whole system more robust, that people have all these different options in terms of using their Bitcoin and obtaining more Bitcoin. But over 3 years working with bisq, what have you learned? What are the pain points? What do you wish it did better? Like, in your view, I think you have a very unique perspective here. Like, how can the overarching Bitcoin ecosystem, see the lessons that were learned in bisq development and maybe build a project that's better or improve bisq itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. bisq is not perfect by any means. I mean, first of all, the code is quite old and aging. It was written in Java in a time, starting like 6 or 7 years ago, I think. That's it was written in a time where SPV was still used, Bloom filters were still used. This technology is not really used by Bitcoin anymore. Now that it's moved on to better ways of having light nodes on the network with their own trade-offs and everything. But I think more than anything, the code base is just this kind of aging Java code base that's very difficult to work with, and it's very heavy to run a Java virtual machine on your computer. I mean, if anyone who's ever used bisq has known that the fans in your laptop will start spinning and your laptop will get very hot because your bisq node is using all the CPU power and trying to sync all this data. And so I actually made a proposal a couple years ago to re-implement bisq in Rust Lang, which we actually got a very simple proof of concept working, where we had the proof of concept Rust bisq implementation. It's called RISQ, RISQ, running inside of an Android app, so that on my Android phone running like Graphene OS, I had bisq running directly on the phone with no computer, no Raspberry Pi, connecting directly to Tor network, connecting directly to other bisq peer-to-peer nodes, and getting the orders on the market, the offers on the market. And I made a proposal to basically get the bisq DAO to fund the development of this Rust implementation. And the proposal was rejected by the founders of the of the project, basically, who voted against it
because they hold the most DAO tokens. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's their project, right? It's like if you made a proposal to mempool or a mempool space and said we want to re-implement it in a different language, me and Simon would probably say no.
But they could just do it anyway,
right? I mean,
you just won't fund it.
I wanted them to pay for it. I had this other developer, Justin, I was working with at the time, who's I think now with Galloy Money, but he worked very hard on it, and there was some drama. Basically, I think the founders wanted to keep using the Java code base. And despite our really cool proof of concept, which we got up and running very quickly in Rust, they said, no, we want you to use the Java code base with this new RPC API that we're developing. Geez, it must have been like over 2 years ago. And I think that RPC API is still not ready to go, right? So that was just like it. Whereas if we would have kept working on that Rust implementation for 2 years now, we would have had a kick-ass bisq app running on every Android phone.
Right. So you have two trade-offs there. Or two pain points that you've felt with the bisq project, which is basically tech debt, which is just you have this massive old code base that's hard to work on, hard to iterate on. And then the second thing being, I would say, is that we're increasingly moving towards this mobile future where people don't even own computers. And if you want real usage of something, there should be at least a mobile capable way of using it. But I would say I would even go further, where it should be almost a mobile first development, where you're expecting the overwhelm. Like I self-host analytics for Citadel Dispatch, and like you see on the analytics that there is the overwhelming majority of people are coming in through mobile browsers, right? And that's obviously a very basic rudimentary data point, but most people, their main computer, if not their only computer, is a mobile phone.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many reasons why it should be mobile first. or even having the ability to run a headless bisq node on a Raspberry Pi running Umbrel, where you can one-click install bisq from the Umbrel App Store or something and have it remotely connect to
Like
your
the
phone.
Zeus model, where you have
Zeus
an
model,
LND or
exactly.
Core Lightning node running, and then you have Zeus on your phone that natively connects back to it in
Yeah,
an easy
and
way.
every day I
Or like
get
the Samurai model, where you just scan a QR code, same idea.
Exactly.
You're able to connect to your dojo.
and every day 9,000 people ask me when bisq on Umbrel, and
Right.
I have to explain to them that there is no web interface for bisq, and there is no mobile app for bisq that can connect remotely to the headless daemon if
Right.
you ran it headlessly. So, and even the RPC API is not, I think, 100% ready to go either, even though it's been years they've been working on it now. So while you could, in theory, run bisq on a Raspberry Pi, you have no way to interact with it. And it would be so huge for bisq to do this, because most people do not keep their computer on 24 hours a day. And so they just close their laptop lid and their bisq node goes to sleep, and all of their offers disappear from
Right.
the
All their outstanding trades.
exactly, all the liquidity just disappears from the market. So if you had bisq running on Raspberry Pi, you would probably triple the liquidity or more, because of the 24 hours offers being available. And then secondly, you'd have people remotely being able to trade, so you could respond to those offers much
Right.
quicker.
Which is an obvious pain point for anyone who uses bisq, which is that the liquidity is not nearly not it's light years behind the liquidity of like a centralized regulated exchange. And really, to get a good price, you want to have your offer up there for a while because of the liquidity. So you're stuck in a situation where you're always running your computer. So you really can't use your main laptop for something like that. You almost need a desktop that is just always on.
Right. I know lots of people who actually have a whole extra laptop, like their old MacBook or something, just for bisq.
That's like running in the corner of their
Yeah.
bedroom or office that is just constantly has their bisq offers up.
Right. And when you go to their house and you ask to borrow their MacBook charge or whatever, they're like, "No, don't use that one. That's powering my bisq laptop,"
Don't unplug that.
Yeah. So it would be nice to re-implement bisq in a modern protocol way, in a modern programming language, mobile first, probably integrate it with all the popular wallets, so that when you need to fund a bisq trade, it just opens your...
And in practice, what you're seeing is something getting built from scratch in that situation, right?
I think at this point, yeah, it would be a full re-implementation. So while the bisq app is great and it works and people use it every day to trade, it could be reborn. And there are efforts to... Well, I guess bisq 2, they've been working on this for a while now, which my understanding is it's going to be a more generic contract execution environment, but they're still not addressing a lot of the problems I see, which is like the aging code base. I mean, they're still going to make it in Java with it, just...
So, I mean, I think that's an interesting thought process to go down. So if you were to build an alternative to bisq that tries to accomplish the same goals as bisq from scratch today, what would be the key highlights of that? And maybe, obviously, like, this is from your perspective, but obviously someone else could build it, or the dream alternative. What is the dream alternative today, if we could,
Yeah, that's a
with
good
what we know
question.
today?
I guess nowadays everybody... I mean, there were no Raspberry Pi full nodes 6 or 7 years ago when bisq got started.
Even 2 years ago.
Exactly, like Umbrel is still quite...
The newcomers in the space have no idea
how bad it was.
Yeah, it's and people say like development in Bitcoin goes slow, right? But like on that front, it's amazing how much
Even mempool
progress
space
has been made.
Yeah, mempool did not exist like over 3 years ago, right?
Right.
So
I mean, when I got into the space, the block explorers we were using was just fucking absolute garbage.
I guess if I had to re-implement bisq from scratch, the wish list would be something like, of course, you separate the backend daemon from the front end daemon in that typical Zeus model, where you pair a mobile app to a Raspberry Pi backend. But I would also want to... what we also made this proof of concept was that you didn't need a Raspberry Pi, because
That's even better.
right, if you want to onboard someone to bisq in a bar, like at a meetup,
Right.
like, okay, install the bisq app on your phone. You can fund their first trade for them or something if they give you cash in
But,
person.
I mean, that's a big trade-off of bisq, is that you need sats to
But
buy sats.
if you're at a meetup though, and you had the mobile apps, that wouldn't be a problem, because
Right.
you could just give cash to someone and have them...
Or they could be a friend and just
that
sats,
too, right?
load you up with some sats for your first trade.
Or if there's a Bitcoin ATM at the meetup, right? You
Right.
could buy sats on the ATM and load them into your bisq. So there's definitely, you would want to be have a separated back end and front end. Whereas right now the bisq node is, very, very
One
tightly
big blob.
one big blob, exactly. And it's very heavy and it's very slow. So you'd want it to run 24 hours a day on your Raspberry Pi, just like your Bitcoin daemon, just like your Lightning daemon. You want your bisq daemon to run on your Raspberry Pi 24 hours a day. Obviously, all your offers should be up all the time, and anybody should be able to take your offers 24 hours a day. Right now, if you close your computer, all those offers disappear and nobody can take them. The second wish list item is that it should be integrated into, first of all, there should be its own bisq mobile app, but that bisq mobile app that remotely connects to your Raspberry Pi should be integrated with all the popular mobile wallet apps, so that you don't need to keep funds on your bisq app. You can just keep them in your Moon wallet or your Zeus wallet or whatever. And that way, or you could even connect your Trezor to your phone and load them directly from your Trezor into your bisq app to fund the trade,
Right.
or the other way around.
Right now, bisq has wallets for every single cryptocurrency that they support integrated directly.
Well,
right?
bisq only supports Bitcoin. If you want to
Well, what
buy,
happens if you trade shitcoins on bisq?
so say for example, you buy Monero on bisq.
Yeah, you need a separate Monero wallet.
Correct.
Oh, okay, but the Bitcoin wallet is built into bisq.
Correct. Yeah, and the mediator would have to verify your Monero trade on some Monero block explorer.
Right.
So yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, so the trade protocol also could be improved, and this is something they are improving right now with the bisq v2. It's more of a generic contract execution thing, so you could agree on pretty much anything, right? You could agree to trade dollars for euros is the example they like to use, where it doesn't even have to be Bitcoin based. It could be Lightning, could be Liquid, could be anything, right? And you just make up whatever arbitrary contract terms you want. Of course, you'd want to like normalize those contracts so that they can be on a or offer book and have
An order book, yeah.
market price discovery. But I think once you have it running 24 hours a day on a Raspberry Pi with a slick mobile app that's integrated into all the other mobile apps and arbitrary contract terms, then you could do DLCs, right? Like Chris Stewart at SharedBits saw the bisq offer book. He's like, oh my God, this is exactly what we need for our DLCs, because he's figured out the DLC side, but he doesn't have any offer book.
Right. So if you don't have the order book, there's no it's really hard to take advantage of liquidity. It just makes the market completely inefficient.
Right. And
so, I mean, so you're going back and forth here. I mean, obviously the easier access point is you're running the bisq backend on a home server, whether that's a Raspberry or something more powerful, and you connect back to it on your phone. That's a very more that's an easier reach. It's more actionable. I mean, we have Marcusat in the comments saying what the first thought that comes to my mind as well is like, if it's mobile only, if it's everything's running on your phone, I mean, you're going to run into battery issues probably is the main issue, right?
Actually, that's not, I mean, look at Zeus Wallet, right? Or any wallet app on your phone. That doesn't drain the battery. Why?
But Zeus is not running 24/7 on your phone. It's just, it's connecting back.
It doesn't have, so there's different threat models.
Right. Zeus, you're running on a home server, you're running your Lightning and your Bitcoin node, and then Zeus is connecting back to it on demand when it needs to.
Right, but take another, okay, take a non Zeus wallet like I don't know, Moon Wallet or Phoenix Wallet or something. They all have their own trade-offs in terms of
also not running 24/7 though, right? And with the bisq model, you need to be running 24/7.
Not
no matter what.
So there's some more technical tricks you can do to keep your offers live on the network, right, without actually having to run a full node all the time.
So like you're like broadcasting your offer to peers, the peers are keeping it alive, and then you just need to be online when it's time to process the trade. Is that the thought?
Something like that, right? Where you would get a push notification and then your node wakes up and then actually does the more heavy lifting. But the reason why bisq is so heavy on a computer right now is mostly just because it's implemented in Java and because it's using Bloom filters and SPV.
Right. Which most newcomers have no idea what that is.
Right. It's just this very inefficient. Well, first of all, Java is very heavy because it's a virtual machine that's, inefficient in its own way. But then on top of that, to make it like exponentially more heavy, you're processing like every block of Bitcoin with very heavy, computationally expensive Bloom filters. And so, I mean, this is not used by any wallet anymore except bisq. That's how old it is. So if you fix that to use something more modern, like Trino protocol or even Electrum protocol, I mean,
Right.
it's all trade-offs, right? If you have your own Raspberry
Everything
Pi,
has trade-offs.
yeah, so you can save battery by using somebody else's node to use the heavy lifting, right? Or you can run your own Raspberry.
But the key is like figuring out a way to implement it in a way that you don't have to be online 24/7, running it 24/7.
Correct, but you still want your offers to be live 24/7.
And you don't want censorship risk of a centralized server holding the offers.
Exactly. There is no centralized server in bisq.
But I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
that would be the easiest way to implement it, would be like there's a centralized web server that's holding all, and that's what RoboSats does. I don't know if you're familiar with RoboSats, but RoboSats is an onion only service that the centralized server is holding the full order book. But it's connected through Tor, and you don't need KYC, and the actual orders are P2P, but the order book is centralized.
It's kind of like a local Bitcoins on Tor.
Yeah.
That's
A
interesting.
Lightning only.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so there's just a million ways
Very new.
to improve bisq. What's that question in the chat?
No, he's saying what we said, which is Moon is not 24/7. A push notification wakes up the app when it needs to
Right,
be
exactly,
online.
yeah.
And a centralized server is sending the push notification, which is a different trade-off, obviously.
Yeah, every wallet has its own trade-offs. Every backend daemon, every
Is there anything else on the wish list that you would have for a bisq alternative?
probably remove the BSQ token.
So let's go into that. So the BSQ token is used for the bisq DAO.
Or at least change the way it works, because you
So how does it work right now?
you kind of want, like, obviously the founders of the project, or maybe I should say the contributors to the project, you know, any random new pseudonym can start contributing to bisq, which is great. But you don't you there's a lot of reasons why they need this basically shitcoin token to govern the bisq DAO, right? Because you need to have, like, for example, a centralized exchange like Kraken has a corporation with shareholders, and they elect directors, and
like we saw with Twitter and Elon and stuff.
exactly, it's this huge power struggle,
Bureaucracy,
and
regulated.
if you have a company, then that's what you have. But what does bisq have? Bisq cannot have, because bisq cannot be a company, because then the governments of the world could go to bisq and say, you need KYC.
Like they did with BitMEX. They could arrest the founders.
Oh, yeah. And
put you in
so
jail.
bisq arguably needs a DAO and a governance. This is like the one legit use of a governance token, right? There's 9,000 shitcoin scams out there that all have their own tokens. But the purpose of those tokens is just to pump bags and dump
Enrich
on
the founders.
Exactly. But with bisq, you know, the contributors actually need it to, like, manage the network for censorship resistance. And it works well when
So it's one BSQ, one vote.
correct. So it works well when you make a contribution to bisq, the open source project, and as a reward for your contributions, you get some BSQ token, and then you can vote on important proposals, or, you know, should we change the fees, or should we change the whatever, should we list this new shitcoin, or should we tell them to fuck off? You know, like, all of the really important proposals, that's when your voting rights come in. And the more contributions you make to the project, the more votes you get, which is a really cool system, and it works extremely well. And there's also, you know, votes for things like, okay, well, should we add Wiz as a price server operator? You know, should we add mempool space as the explorer? Or should we let mempool project run bisq.market's website for the DAO? These things are cool, because then the contributors, like, the more contributions they've made, the more merit they have to weigh in on these important decisions.
Right.
But the problem, I feel, you know, in my personal opinion, it's kind of perverts the incentives of the project. Like, the minute you have a token, now the incentives of the contributors is to pump their bags.
Right. They want the token to, they're getting paid in the token. They're holding the token.
Exactly. And
they want it to increase in value.
It works well, I feel, if the token is only used by the contributors internally, and
or for votes.
Right, for voting.
That doesn't have monetary value.
Exactly. Yeah, something like this.
But how can you actually stop that when things like bisq exist? Couldn't they just trade the tokens for sats?
Actually, there's something called merit. So even if you sell or transfer your tokens to someone else, you still retain the voting rights. And this is to prevent the quote unquote Roger Ver attack, where
He just buys all the BIS tokens.
exactly it's proof of stake, right?
Makes it Bcash by default or whatever.
Right. So it's kind of resistant to that attack to some extent. And also, some contributors just hodl their BSQ tokens. But yeah, once you apply the financial part to the token, it kind of perverts the whole incentives of everything. And so if I make a large contribution to bisq, say I sponsored the Bitcoin 2021 conference and got a bisq booth and I used my own fiat to pay for that, cool. Now I got a bunch of BSQ token. And that's great until I realized that now I'm incentivized to pump this shitcoin, essentially, right? Like
you either dump it immediately for sats or
yes,
you're
and
incentivized to pump the price of it.
exactly. And then a lot of contributors' time is now diverted to how do we pump our bags, right? How do we make this token go up in price? How do we dump on retail? And it's terrible. And so now I realize, like, yeah, I just want to dump this as fast as possible, but I can't help but feel it ruins the project in a lot of ways. So yeah, answer your question about the wish list, I would definitely think about changing the economics. Because really all shitcoin scams can be boiled down to like 3 steps, right? First you fill your bag, then you pump your bag, then you dump your bag on
Right.
the normies coming in to FOMO in. And so if there's like a Howey test for a security, like the whiz test for a shitcoin is like, are they filling their bags with some kind of pre-mine or issuing tokens?
Which this was fully pre-mined. The founders have the majority of it, I presume.
I mean, you'd have to do some blockchain analysis to figure that out.
But like gut-wise, probably.
I mean, there's so many pseudonyms now. I have no idea. It could be. And if they did, yeah, but well, you're right. It was pre-mined.
So they had them all in the beginning.
Yeah, but
what are the? Can we go through the mechanics of the BSQ token? So, so trading fees on bisq you can pay with the BSQ token or Sats.
Yes, and I suggest you to pay in Sats and not participate.
Well, the idea is that if you're a contributor, you can then use the BSQ token to pay for your trading fees, right? So then, when a contributor receives BSQ, is that newly minted BSQ? Does it get created out of thin air?
They're essentially
diluting.
issuing it. They're basically coloring their own Sats into colored Bitcoin with the DAO's consent and approval. So when you do some contribution to bisq, you can go on the DAO and make a compensation request to approve your coloring of Sats into BSQ.
And then, okay, so obviously if you pay your trading fees with BSQ, that goes into this treasury, right?
Right.
That can then get distributed for projects.
So there's essentially a role called the Burning Man who takes all the Bitcoin revenue of bisq and goes on the market and buys BSQ and burns it. And I think
is that what's happening? And when you pay Sats, it's essentially pumping the BSQ price.
Right. And so if it were balanced and the amount of BSQ issued and the amount of BSQ burned was equal, or the supply even decreasing, then it would work, right? But in practice, people can't resist the urge to print tokens. And also,
so more BSQ is getting created than is being collected in trading fees, whether that's directly as BSQ or as Sats that get burned, that used to
varies,
buy
right?
BSQ and then burn it.
Like sometimes bisq is quote unquote profitable when the supply goes down, and sometimes they're not, and they inflate the supply. And that's okay for a company to issue more shares or redeem more shares. This happens all the time. But I think, again, going back to the 3-step test, are the founders, are the contributors to the project now distracted with the incentive to pump their bags?
Right.
And this ruins the project in a lot of ways, I feel. Right? Like with mempool, obviously we don't have any mempool token. We don't need a mempool token. We just have a Bitcoin treasury for our expenses and to pay salaries and data center bills and everything. And it works extremely well. And if bisq had simply set up a Bitcoin treasury 6 or 7 years ago when the project started, then they would be super, super wealthy now, right?
Right.
I mean, 6 or 7 years ago, the price was like, what, $100 in 2013? Think about all the donations they got.
I mean, I feel like you can do all of this except for the voting with just Sats, right? Like you collect your trading fees in Sats, You hold the treasury in sats. You pay out contributors in sats.
Yes. And I think the thought at the time was that if you have a Bitcoin treasury, then whoever controls that treasury is like a target.
Central point of failure.
Exactly.
I mean, they are.
But this still exists anyway with the shitcoin too,
Right.
right? So I think
The shitcoin doesn't really solve that, but it solves the
but I think
the voting.
Right. So you need
So you make a voting token.
that's only voting. You can't use it for anything else, and it can't be tracked. Like once you get those voting rights, like you can't
sell
sell
them.
Yeah. And then if
You block sending.
and then if you, whenever someone pays their trading fee revenue to bisq, that UTXO should get like randomly distributed to the BSQ holders somehow. And there's
Right.
clever ways to do this with,
Because BSQ is already built on top of Bitcoin. So
right. Pretend
so
I have
every BSQ token has a Bitcoin address associated with it. You could technically just send it to one of those Bitcoin addresses.
exactly right. So now you see where we're going. So now, like, if
so now you're paying out sats dividends
to
without
directly
a
to the
shitcoin,
contributors,
and then the token is just a voting token.
right? That's one thing I feel
That's pretty cool.
would improve the project quite a bit, because then the contributors are no longer distracted with the incentive to pump their bags.
They want to pump sats.
They want to pump sats. I mean, this is how it's supposed to work, where all of our incentives are supposed to be aligned. We're not supposed to have a shitcoin that we want to pump, right?
Right.
This is why the mempool project's so successful. We get all these donations in sats, and then Bitcoin goes up in price, and now we have more money to
right.
and operations of the site. So, yeah, bisq has an aging code base. bisq has a lot of technical debt. bisq has this tokenomics thing, which I think they need to fix. But if it did get re-implemented with the mobile app and the Raspberry Pi backend daemon that runs 24 hours, and they fix this token thing to not be incentivized.
But they have an incentive never to fix that token.
Exactly. Right now that all these contributors are bag holders, they're not going to
even the contributors. Not only do the founders have an incentive, even the contributors have an incentive.
Exactly. It's typical shitcoinomics, where now everyone's part of the scam, and even I felt like this is fucked up.
I mean, you dumped on retail.
No, I sold it to the Burning Man, and then he burned the BSQ. But you're incentivized to pump the bags, right?
Oh, you sold it to the Burning Man, but it doesn't matter because it's a liquid market, so it's retail somewhere bought it.
Right. So that's the unethical part I feel about it, right? Is that people are speculating on these BSQ tokens, and the contributors want to pump the price so that they can dump at a higher valuation.
Right.
And it just ruins the project, right?
Well, if the incentive was, if more people use this, KYC free distributed service, you get higher trading revenues. Everyone wins, and they get paid in sats.
Yeah, I mean, I love bisq. I think we should all use it, but it's just an old project that can be improved in a lot of ways. And
no, I think this is very productive. I appreciate the candor. So I mean, we're 2 hours and 20 minutes in. This is a little bit. I mean, this is completely unrelated to Bitcoin. But you bought me and my lady a beautiful record player, and you set it up for us. You want to talk a little bit about your love for records and panels, or?
Yeah, I guess I'm an infrastructure.
He was in. People think Wiz was born to run ISPs. I mean, he's running 2 ISPs right now. But if you watched him with a vinyl player, you'd think of completely different Wiz.
Yeah, it's so low tech and analog.
You look like a kid in a candy shop.
I mean, it's a whole new world. It was
my living room.
It's a whole, yeah. I mean, it's like a rabbit hole, right, in itself. And I live in Japan, so I have access to 40-year-old vintage, but still mint condition vinyl record players from the Yahoo auction market in Japan. And first, I bought this vinyl record player from Matt, and I opened it up in my office in Japan. I'm like, I am keeping this and buying a second one. And it's just this rabbit hole you go down.
We have sister players. He's got one in Japan, and I got one here.
Right. So we just set up one in Matt's house, and yeah, it's beautiful when you get it all put together. And what was it, Biggie? We were
listening to Biggie. Let's fucking go.
And Bob Marley. Yeah,
it was banging.
Yeah, and it's such the rabbit hole, right? Because even if you're into like high-tech infrastructure like servers and networks and ISP and cryptography, it's so nice to forget all that and play with a vinyl record player, which has no microchips in it, right? It's like 100% analog.
Just pure magic.
Just pure magic. I mean, if you put your ear close enough to the stylus, you can actually hear the
We did that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, this is your first show on Dispatch to consider getting a old school record player that will last.
It's a very low
lifetime.
time preference like device.
Don't go out and buy a
Plasticky one.
Yeah, Wiz didn't mention it yet, but don't go and buy a piece of shit.
I mean, you can go to like some retail store like Best Buy and get a new vinyl record player for like $200-300, and it's plasticky and probably terrible quality, and it'll break in a few years. Versus the one that Matt and I have is over 40 years old, and it was built in
So crazy.
the peak of that, format,
and still bangs.
And
so well.
It sounds amazing 40 years later. Like they don't build them like that anymore.
Well, anyway, Wiz, I appreciate the gift, and it was honestly humbled. One of the best gifts I've ever gotten. I know my lady's super excited about it, and you probably cost us a lot of sats and time because it's just the beginning of the rabbit hole, and it's just gonna be a sats pit, big money pit. But I'm very excited to go down it with you. You know, we're gonna basically both that same player, different continents across the world, going down the rabbit hole at the same time, which is pretty fucking powerful. So, I mean, as you know, you've been on the show multiple times. I like to wrap it up with final thoughts. What final thoughts do you have for the freaks today?
Bitcoin is growing so fast, and to see that Miami conference or even the Nashville meetup now is so huge, and you have entire countries adopting it, and you're going to be able to use it all over at the grocery store, everything. I mean, it's like nothing we've ever even dreamed about just a few years ago, right? It'll be so exciting to see how Bitcoin continues to evolve and grow, and how it will improve. And it happens so quickly. People feel Bitcoin is so slow, but really in just a few years, it's taken off so much. Just since last Miami, right? 1 year ago, not even.
I mean, the size of the conference alone doubled in size.
Amazing, yeah.
Things are moving fast. I know they feel like they're moving slow, but they're moving fast and slow at the same time, I guess. But it's pretty crazy watching the whole thing.
I think the coolest thing, though, is you can go the coolest thing about being a Bitcoiner, you can go anywhere in the whole world and you have family.
Yes.
That's
what people miss when they it's great. I think that these events have, free access to the content online. But the really powerful thing is just meeting Bitcoiners, spending time with Bitcoiners, and having online conversations that are not recorded, and bouncing ideas off each other. It's just super powerful. And I know it can be a little bit scary and overwhelming, but you don't have to give up that much. And you should be careful to a degree in terms of theft and privacy, but go to a local meetup, or just meet people, talk to people, talk to like-minded individuals, because at the end of the day, open source code is extremely powerful, but it's only as powerful as the individuals that choose to run it and build it and support it. And if you don't have a meetup, consider starting a meetup, and it doesn't have to be super high production value. You guys can just meet in a bar, and drink some beers and drink some whiskey and take it from there and do something more significant in the future. But I would say that, especially for developers, one of the single most powerful things you can do is meet people in your local community, work together with them, build circular economies, build local Bitcoin grassroots Bitcoin economies is extremely, extremely powerful. And one of the things I think a lot of people miss with the story of El Salvador is the story, to me, of El Salvador is not a story of a president deciding top down that he was going to make Bitcoin legal tender in his country. The story is a group of like-minded individuals that started a grassroots local Bitcoin economy that grew to the point that he couldn't ignore it anymore. He had a choice, right? You either embrace it or fight it, and he chose to embrace it. So if you're out there and you're thinking about it, every person you work with, every merchant you onboard, every meetup you attend really does make a difference. Our good friend 6102 Bitcoin, who's still out there, even though he's quiet on Twitter, has a meetup website at bitcoin-only.com/meetups. You can see if there's one in your area. And like I said, if there isn't one, consider starting one. Talking about 6102, I'm probably not long for the Twitter world myself. So if you are a freak out there, consider joining our fantastic matrix chat, which I will show one more time. If you go to citadeldispatch.com and click that Citadel chat. I love you freaks. You guys keep me going. I think together we can win. We will win. But it's not going to be easy. Personal responsibility is never the easier path. I appreciate all you who continue to support the show, whether that's financially via sats, or by just sharing it with your friends and family. And once again, a reminder that Citadel Dispatch is available on all podcast apps. All you have to do is search Citadel Dispatch, and reviews do help. They do make a difference. So with all that said, I want to thank Wiz. I want to thank the freaks, and we'll see you next week. Cheers, guys.
gift of our own device. In the master's chambers, they gathered for the feast. They stab it with their stealing knives, but they just can't kill the beast. Last thing I remember, I was running for the door. I had to find the passage back to the place I was before. Relax, said the night man, we are programmed to receive. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Love your freaks. Stay humble, stack sats.